The Diana Deception, the crash that wasn't an accident. A special thanks to Lily Lamouche for suggesting this investigation. There's a flame burning in Paris, not in a cathedral or a museum, but above a tunnel where the most photographed woman in the world took her last breath. Tourists visit it every day. They leave flowers, they leave notes, they leave teddy bears and handwritten letters in languages from across the globe. They take selfies with the golden torch in the background, smiling, unaware that they're standing over a crime scene that was cleaned up before the world could ask the right questions. On the night of August 31st, 1997, the world stopped turning for exactly 6 hours. That's how long it took for the news to travel from a hospital room in Paris to every corner of the planet. From the favelas of Rio to the skyscrapers of Tokyo, people woke up to the same impossible headline. Diana Spencer, Princess of Wales, was dead. The woman who held AIDS patients when no one else would. The woman who walked through minefields to prove they needed to be cleared. The woman who looked directly into cameras and told the truth about her failing marriage to the future King of England. Gone. Killed in a car crash in a tunnel in Paris. They told us it was an accident, a drunk driver, a pack of paparazzi on motorbikes, a tragic collision of fame, speed and bad luck. The narrative was simple, clean, and immediately accepted by a world too shocked to question it. But accidents don't usually come with warning letters written years in advance. Accidents don't require intelligence agencies from 3 different countries to be active in the same neighbourhood at the same time. And accidents don't systematically eliminate every witness who might say otherwise. This is not a story about a princess. This is a story about what happens when someone with a global platform becomes inconvenient to people who prefer to operate in shadows. This is about a woman who knew too much, loved the wrong person, and paid the ultimate price for refusing to stay silent. The flame above the Pont de l'Alma tunnel is called the Flame of Liberty. It represents freedom. It represents truth. And directly beneath it, 28 years ago, both of those things died in the back of a black Mercedes. Unless, of course, they were murdered. Act 1. The night the world stopped. Paris in late August is when the city empties. The locals leave for the countryside and the tourists take over the cafes and boulevards. The heat breaks just enough to make the evenings pleasant, and the Seine reflects the lights of the city like a ribbon of gold. But on the night of August 31st, 1997, Paris was about to become the centre of the universe. Diana Spencer hadn't been a princess in any official capacity for over a year. Her divorce from Charles, Prince of Wales, had been finalised in August of 1996. The settlement had stripped her of the title Her Royal Highness, a calculated humiliation that she bore with public grace and private fury. But divorce papers don't make you less famous. If anything, they had made her more powerful. Free from the constraints of royal protocol, she had become something more dangerous than a princess. She had become a person with nothing left to lose, and Diana used that freedom like a weapon. She embraced causes that made the establishment uncomfortable. In January of 1997, she walked through an active minefield in Angola, wearing body armour and a face shield, to draw attention to the campaign to ban landmines. The images went global. British arms manufacturers, who profited enormously from selling such weapons, were furious. Defence contractors lobbied the government. Conservative politicians called her naive, emotional, and out of her depth. Diana smiled for the cameras and kept walking through minefields. She visited homeless shelters at night, without press, sitting with people society had forgotten and listening to their stories. She held the hands of AIDS patients at a time when much of the world still believed the disease could be transmitted by touch. She was photographed doing it, deliberately, sending a message that fear was the real epidemic. She challenged the stigma, she challenged the system, and she made powerful people very, very nervous. But it was that summer, the summer of 1997, that everything changed. She had been photographed aboard a yacht in the Mediterranean with Dodi Fayed, the son of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. The photos showed them kissing, laughing, holding hands on the deck of a luxury vessel while the sun set over the Italian coast. The British tabloids went into overdrive. Some celebrated her happiness, calling it a fairy tale comeback after years of unhappiness with Charles. Others called it a scandal, a betrayal, a disaster waiting to happen. The establishment called it a problem. Dodi wasn't just any boyfriend. He was Muslim, he was Egyptian, and his father owned Harrods, making him wealthy but not aristocratic, rich but not respectable in the eyes of those who mattered. In the calculus of the British royal family, this was an equation that didn't balance. Diana, the mother of the future king, romantically involved with a Muslim man, potentially marrying into a family that the establishment viewed as foreign and unsuitable. The whispers had already started in the halls of power. In private clubs and government offices, people were asking the same question: what do we do about Diana? But Diana wasn't thinking about any of that on the evening of August 31st. She and Dodi had spent the day in Paris, shopping on the Champs-Élysées, planning a future that felt, for the first time in years, genuinely hopeful. They had visited a jewellery store. Staff would later confirm that Dodi had been looking at engagement rings. Diana had been, glowing, laughing, more relaxed than anyone had seen her in months. They returned to the Ritz Hotel, owned by Mohammed Al Fayed, for dinner in the Imperial Suite. They wanted privacy, intimacy, a few hours away from the cameras. But privacy was impossible. Outside, the paparazzi were gathering like a storm. Dozens of them on motorbikes, cameras ready, engines running, waiting for the couple to emerge. The feeding frenzy had reached a fever pitch. Photos of Diana and Dodi were worth tens of thousands of pounds. A picture of them kissing, of an engagement ring, of anything intimate. Those were worth even more. The photographers jostled for position, made deals with hotel staff for inside information, and prepared for the chase they knew was coming. Inside the hotel, Diana and Dodi finished their meal. The original plan had been to leave through the front entrance and drive directly to Dodi's apartment on the Rue Arsène-Housset. But the crowd outside made that impossible. They would be swarmed. The drive would be chaos. So at approximately midnight, the decision was made. They would leave through the rear entrance on Rue Cambon. They would use a decoy vehicle at the front to draw away the photographers, and they would take an alternative route back to the apartment. Simple, clean, safe. Except it wasn't. The driver was Henri Paul, the deputy head of security at the Ritz. He was 41 years old, experienced, trusted, and according to everyone who saw him that evening, completely sober and in control. CCTV footage from the hotel, which would later be analysed frame by frame, showed him arriving for his shift earlier that evening. He walked steadily, without stumbling. He chatted with guests in the bar, laughing at jokes, his speech clear and coherent. He performed a series of security checks that required focus and coordination. At one point he bent down to tie his shoe, maintaining perfect balance, a movement that would have been nearly impossible for someone severely intoxicated. Hotel bartender François Tondil would later testify. I served Henri 2 drinks that evening. 2. Over the course of 4 hours. He was not drunk. I would stake my reputation on it. I've been a bartender for 20 years. I know what drunk looks like. Henri Paul was not drunk. But the official story would tell a different tale. The car was a black Mercedes S280, license plate 688 LTV 75. It was one of several vehicles in the Ritz's fleet, armoured but not conspicuously so, elegant and fast. Diana and Dodi sat in the back seat, Diana behind the front passenger seat, Dodi behind the driver. Trevor Rees-Jones, a bodyguard employed by Mohammed Al Fayed, sat in the front passenger seat. He was the only one wearing a seatbelt. That detail, that single decision, would save his life and destroy his memory. At 12:23 in the morning, the Mercedes pulled away from the rear entrance of the Ritz Hotel. The decoy plan had partially worked. Most of the paparazzi had followed the wrong car, racing after an empty vehicle heading in the opposite direction. But not all of them. A handful of photographers on motorbikes, veterans of the chase, had anticipated the ruse. They picked up the trail almost immediately. Henri Paul saw them in the rearview mirror. He accelerated. This was standard procedure when being followed. Lose them in traffic. Get the principals to safety. Move fast. The Mercedes wove through the streets of Paris, crossing the Place de la Concorde, approaching the Seine. Behind them, the motorbikes kept pace, their headlights cutting through the darkness, their riders leaning into turns, cameras slung around their necks like weapons. Romain Rao, one of the pursuing photographers, would later describe the chase. We were trying to keep up, but the Mercedes was fast. Henri was driving aggressively, but not recklessly. He knew what he was doing. We turned onto the Cours Albert Premier, running parallel to the river. I remember thinking we might lose them. Then they turned toward the tunnel, the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. I followed, but fast became too fast. The Mercedes entered the Pont de l'Alma tunnel at an estimated speed of somewhere between 60 and 70 miles per hour. The tunnel is a straight shot, well lit by overhead fluorescent lights, familiar to any Parisian driver. The road surface was dry, visibility was clear. There should have been no problem. Then came the flash. Multiple witnesses standing outside the tunnel, pedestrians and late-night wanderers, reported seeing something unusual just before the crash. Not headlights, not camera flashes from a distance. Something else. Something that turned night into day for a fraction of a second. François Levistre, a witness who had been driving just ahead of the Mercedes, gave a statement to police hours after the crash. I saw a bright flash in my rearview mirror. It was white, intense, blinding. It wasn't a camera flash. I've seen those 1,000 times. This was different. It filled the entire tunnel for a moment. Then I heard the sound. The Mercedes swerved violently to the left. Henri Paul's hands jerked on the wheel, overcorrecting, losing control. The car clipped a white Fiat Uno that was emerging from the tunnel, scraping along its side, sending white paint onto the black Mercedes. The impact destabilized the vehicle further. The Mercedes spun, fishtailing wildly, tyres screaming against the pavement. And then it hit. The 13th pillar. The car collided with the concrete support pillar at full speed, the front of the vehicle crumpling like paper, the engine block driven backward into the cabin. The sound was heard blocks away. A deep, reverberating crunch that echoed through the tunnel and out into the Parisian night. Metal tearing, glass exploding, the hiss of escaping steam, and then silence. Dodifea died instantly, his chest crushed by the force of the impact. Henri Paul died instantly, his body broken beyond recognition. Trevor Rees-Jones was unconscious, his face shattered by the airbag and the dashboard, but alive. And Diana Spencer, thrown from her seat into the footwell behind the driver, was critically injured but breathing. Her heart was still beating. She was alive. The first paparazzi arrived within seconds. Instead of calling for help immediately, instead of checking on the victims, they began taking photographs. Flashes lit up the wreckage like a grotesque red carpet event, turning the scene into a spectacle. Romain Rao climbed through the shattered window. He saw Diana, crumpled and broken, her blonde hair matted with sweat and blood. He heard her speak. "Leave me alone," she whispered. Her voice was weak, barely audible. "Please, leave me alone." Those may have been her last coherent words. The words of a woman who had spent her entire adult life being hunted by cameras, now dying in front of them. Other witnesses arrived. Some called emergency services. Some tried to pull Diana from the wreckage. One man, a medical professional who happened to be passing by, climbed into the car and tried to stabilize her, checking her pulse, assessing her injuries. He would later tell investigators she was alive, hurt badly, but alive. I thought she had a chance. If they got her to a hospital quickly, she had a chance. The ambulance took 1 hour and 40 minutes to travel 4 miles. Act 2. The first inconsistencies. The sun rose over Paris on September the 1st, 1997, and with it came the news that would break the world. Diana Spencer, Princess of Wales, was dead. She had died at 4 o'clock in the morning at the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital after surgeons spent 2 hours trying to repair her internal injuries. Her heart had stopped twice. They couldn't save her. Within hours, the official narrative began to take shape. The story was clean, simple, and devastating. Henri Paul, the driver, had been drunk. Toxicology reports showed his blood alcohol level was 3 times over the legal limit. He had also been taking prescription antidepressants that, when combined with alcohol, would have severely impaired his judgment and coordination. He had been driving recklessly, speeding through the streets of Paris to escape the paparazzi. The crash was his fault. A tragic accident caused by alcohol, speed, and poor decisions. The world mourned. Flowers piled up outside Kensington Palace in London, millions of bouquets creating a carpet of grief that stretched for hundreds of feet. People stood in line for hours to sign condolence books. Strangers wept openly in the streets, and the media repeated the official story over and over. Drunk driver, tragic accident. Diana was gone. But within the story, cracks began to appear almost immediately. The first crack was Henri Paul himself. The toxicology reports claimed he had a blood alcohol content of 1.75 grams per litre, well over 3 times the legal limit in France. But that number didn't match what people had seen that night. The CCTV footage from the Ritz Hotel showed Henri Paul arriving for his shift at around 7 in the evening. He walked steadily, shoulders straight, movements coordinated. He conversed with guests in the hotel bar, his words clear and measured. He joked with staff. He performed security checks that required climbing stairs, reviewing camera feeds, and coordinating with other personnel. At one point, approximately 2 hours before the crash, Henri Paul was filmed bending down to tie his shoelace. He did so without losing balance, without wobbling, without any sign of intoxication. Forensic experts who later reviewed the footage noted that this action would have been nearly impossible for someone with a blood alcohol level of 1.75. At that level of intoxication, basic motor functions become severely compromised. Balance is impaired. Reaction times slow dramatically. Yet Henri Paul moved with precision and control. Claude Garrec, a colleague of Henri Paul's at the Ritz, gave an interview years later that was never widely publicised. I spoke with Henri that night. We talked about his plans for the next day, about his family, about work. He was Henri. Normal, focused, professional. I've thought about that conversation every day since the crash. If he was drunk, I would have known. We all would have known. But he wasn't. I'm certain of it. Then came the blood samples themselves. The samples that formed the basis for the toxicology report. The foundation of the entire official narrative had problems. Serious problems. The samples were labelled with Henri Paul's name, but forensic experts who reviewed the documentation noted irregularities. The labelling system used did not follow standard French hospital protocol. The chain of custody documentation, which tracks a sample from collection to analysis to ensure its integrity, was incomplete. Key signatures were missing. Timestamps didn't align. And the forensic officer who handled the samples, a man named Jean-Claude Mules, had noted unusual carbon monoxide levels in the blood. Carbon monoxide readings were abnormally high, consistent with someone who had been dead for several hours before the samples were taken, not someone who had died recently in a car crash. Henri Paul died instantly on impact. His blood should not have shown those levels. The discrepancy suggested contamination, mislabelling, or something worse, deliberate substitution. Dr. Peter Venezis, a forensic pathologist who reviewed the case years later, stated on record, "The carbon monoxide levels in those samples are inconsistent with the timeline of death. They suggest either severe procedural errors or that the samples did not belong to Henri Paul. If those samples were compromised, then the entire toxicology report is invalid. And if the toxicology report is invalid, the official explanation for the crash collapses. Jean-Claude Mules, the forensic officer who could have explained the discrepancies, died by suicide in the year 2000. He was found in his apartment, dead from a gunshot wound. There was no note. His colleagues reported that he had been under unusual stress in the months leading up to his death, though they couldn't specify why. His death closed that avenue of investigation permanently. But the inconsistencies didn't stop with the blood samples. They extended to the crash itself and to something, or someone, that had been in the tunnel that night and then vanished. The white Fiat Uno. Multiple witnesses saw a white Fiat Uno emerging from the Pont de l'Alma tunnel seconds after the crash. Some described it moving erratically, speeding away from the scene. Others noted that it seemed to have been inside the tunnel at the time of the collision. Paint traces found on the Mercedes, analysed by forensic teams, confirmed that the Fiat had made contact with Diana's vehicle. White paint, consistent with that used on Fiat Unos from the late 80s and early 90s, was scraped along the side of the black Mercedes. This was not speculation. This was physical evidence. The Fiat Uno had been there. It had collided with the Mercedes, and then it had disappeared. French police launched a search for the vehicle. They checked registration records for every white Fiat Uno in the Paris region. They interviewed owners. They followed leads. Hundreds of cars were inspected, and they found nothing. No damage, no suspicious behaviour, no vehicle that matched the paint analysis. The search went on for months, eventually fading into bureaucratic obscurity. The white Fiat Uno became a footnote, an unexplained detail that official investigations acknowledged but couldn't resolve, until a journalist named James Anderson came into focus. James Anderson was 44 years old, a photographer with a reputation for getting shots that others couldn't. He was aggressive, resourceful, and connected. He had worked for various photo agencies over the years, selling images of celebrities, politicians, and royalty to the highest bidder. But Anderson wasn't just a photographer. He had another role, one that he discussed only in private with people he trusted. According to multiple sources, including former colleagues and intelligence contacts, James Anderson worked as an informant for the DST, the Direction de la Surveillance du Territoire, France's domestic intelligence agency. He provided information about high-profile targets, using his access as a photographer to gather details that intelligence services found useful. He was paid, not lavishly, but enough to supplement his income, and he owned a white Fiat Uno. When investigators finally connected Anderson to the search for the white car, they approached him for questioning. Anderson was cooperative, friendly even, but evasive. He claimed his Fiat Uno had been repainted shortly after the crash, changing from white to a dark colour. He said he had receipts, though they were difficult to verify. He provided alibis for the night of August 31st, claiming he had been at home in central France, far from Paris. Friends and family supported his story, though their accounts were vague, inconsistent, and difficult to confirm. Investigators examined Anderson's repainted Fiat. They found no definitive evidence that it had been involved in the crash. The repainting made forensic analysis nearly impossible. Without concrete proof, the investigation stalled. Anderson was not charged, not arrested, not even formally listed as a suspect. He returned to his life, to his work, to whatever else he was doing for French intelligence. But in May of 2000, less than 3 years after Diana's death, James Anderson was found dead. His body was discovered in a burned-out car in a remote forested area near Nantes, a small town in southern France. The car, a BMW, had been completely incinerated. Anderson's body was charred beyond recognition, identified only through dental records. The official ruling was suicide. Investigators theorized that Anderson had locked himself in the car, doused the interior with gasoline and set himself on fire. Forensic experts who reviewed the case found this explanation highly improbable. Burning to death is one of the most painful ways to die. Suicides by fire are extraordinarily rare, accounting for less than 1% of all suicides. Most people who attempt to kill themselves choose methods that are quick and relatively painless. Burning alive is neither. The agony is excruciating. The survival instinct is overwhelming. Yet James Anderson, according to the official report, had overcome that instinct, locked himself inside, and waited for the flames to kill him. Christophe Pellat, a forensic investigator who examined the scene, gave a statement years later that was buried in obscure case files. The burn pattern was inconsistent with suicide. The fire was intense, professional almost. It consumed everything. There were no accelerants found outside the vehicle, but the damage suggested something more than gasoline. This was not a man who killed himself. This was a man who was killed and then burned to hide evidence. But the case was closed. James Anderson, the photographer with the white Fiat Uno, was gone. Another loose end tied up, another witness silenced, and the pattern was just beginning. Act 3. The Letter. In October of 1993, 4 years before her death, Diana Spencer sat down at a desk in Kensington Palace and wrote a letter. It was addressed to her butler, Paul Burrell, a man she trusted more than almost anyone else in her life. Burrell had been with her for years, loyal, discreet and protective. She gave him the letter with specific instructions. Keep it safe. Don't tell anyone. If anything happens to me, show the world. The letter was handwritten, spanning 2 pages, and it was chilling. I am sitting here at my desk today in October, longing for someone to hug me and encourage me to keep strong and hold my head high. This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure and serious head injury, in order to make the path clear for him to marry Tiggy. Tiggy Legg Bourke was a royal aide, a woman rumoured to be close to Prince Charles. Diana believed Charles wanted her dead so he could remarry without the complications of a living ex-wife, a woman who knew too much and spoke too freely. The letter was specific. It predicted the method, a car accident. It predicted the injury, serious head trauma. And it was written 4 years before Diana died in a car accident with a serious head injury. Paul Burrell kept the letter hidden for years. After Diana's death, he remained silent, bound by loyalty and perhaps fear. He attended the funeral. He grieved privately. And he said nothing about the letter, even as the world accepted the official story of a drunk driver and a tragic accident. But in 2002, Burrell was charged with theft. Prosecutors alleged that he had taken items from Diana's estate without authorization, items that belonged to her sons, William and Harry. The trial began in 2003. It was a spectacle, covered extensively by the media, with Burrell portrayed as a man who had betrayed the trust of the woman he claimed to love. Then, midway through the trial, everything changed. Burrell revealed the letter. He presented it as evidence, showing it to the court, to the world, to everyone who had accepted the official story without question. The letter was verified as authentic, the handwriting confirmed as Diana's, the date established beyond doubt. The charges against Paul Burrell were suddenly dropped. No explanation was given. The trial ended abruptly, and the letter became public, forcing the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. Diana Spencer had predicted her own death. Years before it happened, she'd written down her fears, her certainty that someone was planning to kill her, and she had been right. But the letter was not the only evidence of Diana's fears. As journalists began investigating, as friends came forward, a much larger picture emerged. Diana had told multiple people that she believed her life was in danger. She'd spoken about it openly, sometimes recklessly, as if she knew that silence wouldn't save her. Rosa Monckton, one of Diana's closest friends, gave an interview years later. Diana told me she feared for her life. She said it more than once. She believed there were people who wanted her gone, people who found her inconvenient. She talked about car accidents, about brakes failing. I didn't want to believe her. I thought she was being paranoid, that the stress of the divorce was making her imagine threats that weren't real. But she wasn't imagining anything. She knew. Simone Simmons, an energy healer who worked with Diana in the years before her death, recounted a conversation they had in 1997, just months before the crash. Diana told me, "They're going to kill me, Simone. They're going to stage an accident." I asked her who they were. She said the establishment, the people who control things. They can't let me keep talking. She was frightened, but she was also defiant. She said, "I won't let them silence me. Not yet." Lucia Flecha de Lima, a Brazilian diplomat's wife who had become one of Diana's confidants, reported similar concerns. Diana had told her that she believed her phone was tapped, that her movements were being monitored, that someone was keeping track of everything she did. She spoke about her car, about fears that the brakes might be tampered with, that the steering might be sabotaged. These were not vague anxieties. These were specific, recurring warnings, and Diana had good reason to be afraid. She had become a problem for the establishment, and not just because of her personal life. Her humanitarian work, her public statements, and her willingness to challenge power had made her dangerous. In January of 1997, Diana had walked through an active minefield in Angola. The images were broadcast around the world. Diana in body armour, a face shield, walking carefully through fields marked with red warning signs. She was there to support the international campaign to ban landmines, an effort that directly opposed the interests of British arms manufacturers who made enormous profits selling such weapons. The British government, under pressure from defence contractors, was resistant to a global ban. Conservative politicians accused Diana of meddling in politics, of being naive and out of her depth. But Diana didn't back down. She visited Bosnia. She met with victims of landmines, people who had lost limbs, children who had been maimed, and she used her fame to force the issue onto the global agenda. By the end of 1997, the Ottawa Treaty banning landmines was signed by over 100 countries. Diana's advocacy had been instrumental. She had taken on one of the most powerful industries in the world and won. And that victory made her enemies. But it wasn't just landmines. Diana had hinted in interviews that she knew things, secrets about the royal family, about corruption, about illegal activities that powerful people wanted kept hidden. She spoke carefully, never providing specifics, but the implication was clear. She had information that could cause serious damage if it ever became public. In a BBC interview with Martin Bashir in November of 1995, Diana had said something that sent shockwaves through the establishment. When asked about her future, she said, "I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts, but I don't see myself being queen of this country. I don't think many people will want me to be queen." But it was what she said next that truly alarmed those in power. "I think every strong woman in history has had to walk down a similar path, and I think it's the strength that causes the confusion and the fear. Why is she strong? Where does she get it from? Where is she taking it? Where is she going to use it? Why do the public still support her?" She was speaking about herself, but she was also speaking about control, about power, about the establishment's fear of someone they could no longer contain. And in the months that followed, Diana became even more outspoken, even more willing to challenge the system. Then came Dodi Fayed, the final straw. The summer of 1997, the photos from the Mediterranean, the relationship that was becoming increasingly serious. Dodi was Muslim, he was Egyptian, he was not part of the aristocratic network that controlled British society. And rumours had begun circulating, whispered in private but never confirmed publicly, that Diana might be pregnant. If Diana married Dodi, if she converted to Islam, if she had children with him, the mother of the future King of England would be permanently connected to a family the establishment viewed as foreign, unsuitable, and dangerous. The idea was unthinkable to those in power. Something had to be done, and according to a former MI6 officer, something was already planned. Act 4. The motive. Richard Tomlinson had been a rising star in MI6, the British Secret Intelligence Service. Recruited in the early 1990s, he had worked on various operations across Europe, gathering intelligence, running assets, doing the work that British foreign policy required but could never publicly acknowledge. He was good at his job, efficient, loyal, and effective, until he wasn't. In 1995, Tomlinson was dismissed from MI6. The official reason was vague, citing performance issues and a failure to meet service standards. But Tomlinson believed the real reason was that he had questioned certain operations, raised concerns about legality and ethics, and made enemies among his superiors. Bitter and disillusioned, he began speaking publicly about the inner workings of British intelligence, revealing details that MI6 had desperately wanted kept secret. Most of what Tomlinson said was dismissed by the British government and the media. He was labelled a disgruntled former employee, someone with an axe to grind, someone whose testimony couldn't be trusted. But in 1998, Tomlinson made a claim that could not be ignored. He testified, first to French investigators and later in public statements, that while working for MI6, he had seen a document outlining a plan to assassinate a target, using a method eerily similar to what happened to Diana. The plan, according to Tomlinson, involved causing a car crash in a tunnel by using a high-intensity strobe light to blind the driver. The light would be triggered at a precise moment, causing the driver to lose control and crash. The method was designed to appear accidental. Collateral damage was acceptable. The target would be eliminated and the operation would leave no trace. Tomlinson described the document in detail. It had been part of a training file, a case study used to teach operatives about covert elimination methods. The target in the example was Slobodan Milosevic, the Serbian leader, and the proposed method was to blind his driver in a tunnel in Geneva. The parallels to Diana's death were striking. A tunnel, a blinding light, a car crash, a method designed to look like an accident. Tomlinson could not provide the document itself. He claimed it had been destroyed or reclassified after Diana's death, hidden away in MI6 archives where it could never be found. But his testimony was specific, detailed, and consistent. He described the type of strobe light that would be used, the placement of operatives, the timing required to execute such a plan, and he insisted that the method was real, tested, and available to British intelligence. David Shayler, another former MI6 officer who had also become a whistleblower, corroborated parts of Tomlinson's claims. Shayler stated that MI6 had a division responsible for special operations, a euphemism for activities that included assassinations, sabotage, and other covert actions. He confirmed that such operations were planned with great care to appear accidental, that tunnels were considered ideal locations, and that the goal was always to avoid detection. MI6 doesn't leave fingerprints, Shayler said in an interview. If they wanted someone gone, they would make it look like an accident, a suicide, a random tragedy. That's how it works. That's always how it's worked. The British government denied everything. MI6 issued statements calling Tomlinson and Shayler liars, traitors, and fantasists. The official position was clear. No such operations existed, no such plans had ever been created, and the idea that Diana had been assassinated by British intelligence was absurd. But Tomlinson's claims prompted a formal inquiry. In 2004, the British government announced Operation Paget, a comprehensive investigation into the deaths of Diana and Dodi Fayed. The inquiry would be led by Lord John Stevens, the former Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. It would review all evidence, interview all witnesses, and determine once and for all whether Diana's death was an accident or something more sinister. Operation Paget took 4 years. Investigators reviewed more than 600,000 pages of documents. They interviewed over 300 witnesses. They examined forensic evidence, crash reconstruction data, and intelligence files. The final report, published in December of 2008, was over 800 pages long, and its conclusion was unequivocal. Diana and Dodi died as a result of a tragic accident. There was no conspiracy. There was no assassination. There was no cover-up. But the report had significant problems. Large sections were redacted for reasons of national security. Evidence related to intelligence agency activities in Paris on the night of Diana's death was classified and not included in the public version of the report. French authorities withheld certain documents citing sovereignty and legal restrictions. Key witnesses, particularly French first responders and intelligence personnel, either refused to testify or provided limited statements under conditions that prevented thorough cross-examination. The report addressed Richard Tomlinson's claims about the MI6 assassination plan. It acknowledged that Tomlinson had been an MI6 officer, but characterised him as unreliable, motivated by bitterness toward his former employer. The report stated that no evidence of such a plan targeting Diana could be found in MI6 records. Critics pointed out the obvious problem. If such a plan had existed, it would have been destroyed or classified far beyond the reach of any inquiry. The report addressed the white Fiat Uno, acknowledging that the car had made contact with the Mercedes but concluding that it was not a significant factor in the crash. It didn't explain why the car was never found, why the search had been so ineffective, or why James Anderson, the photographer with the white Fiat, had died under such suspicious circumstances. The report addressed the malfunctioning tunnel cameras, attributing the failure to technical issues. It did not explain why all cameras failed simultaneously, or why no backup systems were in place in one of the most heavily monitored cities in Europe. The report addressed the ambulance delay, citing French medical protocols as the primary reason for the slow transport. It acknowledged that faster transport might have improved Diana's chances of survival, but stopped short of calling the delay a contributing factor in her death. In short, Operation Paget acknowledged many of the inconsistencies and unanswered questions, but explained them away as coincidences, misunderstandings, or irrelevant details. It was a masterclass in how to conduct an investigation that appears thorough while avoiding uncomfortable conclusions. But while the British inquiry was dismissing the conspiracy theories, other evidence was emerging. Evidence that pointed not to a random accident but to a carefully planned operation with a specific motive. The motive became clearer when examining what was happening behind the scenes in the summer of 1997. British intelligence agencies, in coordination with American and French counterparts, were actively monitoring Diana. Declassified documents, released years later, confirmed this surveillance. In 2021, the National Security Agency of the United States released a batch of declassified cables under Freedom of Information Act requests. Among those documents were references to Diana, Spencer and her activities in the months before her death. The cables revealed that the CIA had been tracking Diana's movements, monitoring her communications, and coordinating with MI6 on what the documents called high-visibility Royal Associates. One cable, dated July of 1997, classified Diana as a high-value target whose actions posed potential reputational risks to Allied governments. The cable discussed Diana's relationship with Dodi Fayed, noting that the relationship had significant political and cultural implications and that containment protocols should be considered. The language was bureaucratic, sterile, and chilling. Containment protocols? What did that mean? The documents didn't specify, but the implication was clear. Diana was being watched, assessed, and discussed as a problem that might require intervention. Another document, a memo from the British ambassador to France, Michael J., acknowledged that there had been unusual intelligence activity in Paris on the night of August 31st. The memo, written days after the crash, noted that MI6, the CIA, and the French DSD had all been operating in the vicinity of the Ritz Hotel and the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. The memo stated that their presence was unrelated to the incident and that they had been conducting routine operations. But the coincidence strained credibility. 3 intelligence agencies from 3 different countries, all active in the same area on the same night that Diana died. The official explanation was that it was random, that Paris is a major city where intelligence operations occur regularly. But critics noted that the level of coordination suggested something more deliberate. If Diana was being monitored, if containment protocols were being discussed, if intelligence agencies from multiple countries were active in Paris that night, then the possibility of a planned operation becomes much more plausible. The motive was clear. Diana was a threat to the establishment, to the royal family, to the carefully controlled image of British power. She was unpredictable, outspoken, and increasingly willing to challenge authority. And then there was the question of what Diana knew. In the months before her death, Diana had hinted in several conversations that she possessed information that could be damaging to powerful people. She spoke about illegal arms deals, about corruption within the royal family, about activities that she had witnessed or been told about during her years of marriage to Charles. She never provided specifics publicly, but the implication was clear. Diana had secrets, and those secrets made her dangerous. One journalist, who spoke to Diana several times in 1997, recalled a conversation they had in July. Diana told me she had documentation about certain activities, things she had seen or been told about. She wouldn't say exactly what, but she implied it involved financial impropriety and possibly illegal arms sales connected to people in the government and the royal family. She said she was keeping the documentation safe, that if anything happened to her, it would come to light. That documentation, if it existed, was never found. After Diana's death, her personal belongings were catalogued, but no such files were ever publicly acknowledged. Either they didn't exist, or they were removed before anyone could discover them. Mohammed Al-Fayed, Dodi's father, believed with absolute certainty that Diana and his son had been murdered. For years, he publicly accused the British royal family, specifically Prince Philip, of ordering the assassination. He accused MI6 of carrying it out. He accused the French authorities of cooperating with the cover-up. He was labelled a conspiracy theorist, a grieving father unable to accept a random tragedy, a man whose wealth and influence had made him paranoid. But Al-Fayed had resources. He hired private investigators, former intelligence officers, forensic experts. He pursued leads that official inquiries ignored. He funded independent research, and his investigators uncovered something that would never be fully explained. References to a sealed French intelligence file codenamed Nightfall Directive, Act 5, the post-mortem cover-up. If you wanted to stage a car accident and make it look random, you would need control. Control over the location, control over the evidence, control over the narrative. And the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, on the night of August 31st, 1997, offered exactly that kind of control. The tunnel is enclosed, predictable, and isolated. Once inside, there are limited escape routes, limited visibility from outside, and limited variables. For an operation designed to eliminate a target and make it appear accidental, the Pont de l'Alma tunnel was ideal. But to maintain control, you would need to ensure that no evidence survived. No cameras, no witnesses who couldn't be managed, no forensic traces that couldn't be explained away. And on the night Diana died, every single security camera inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel mysteriously malfunctioned. Not one camera, not 2 cameras, all of them, simultaneously. The tunnel, which was part of a heavily monitored traffic network in one of the most surveilled cities in Europe, had no footage of the crash. French authorities explained this as a technical failure, an unfortunate coincidence. But forensic experts and engineers who reviewed the system found the explanation highly implausible. Jean-Michel Darmon, a traffic systems engineer who worked on Paris's surveillance network, gave an interview years later. The odds of every camera in a tunnel failing at the same time are astronomically low. These systems have redundancies, backups, fail-safes. For all of them to fail simultaneously suggests either catastrophic system failure, which would have been detected and reported immediately, or deliberate sabotage. Someone turned those cameras off. Without footage, it became impossible to verify key details. Was there a white Fiat Uno in the tunnel? Were there other vehicles behaving suspiciously? Was there a flash of light that blinded Henri Paul? Without cameras, there were only witnesses, and witnesses could be discredited, intimidated, or ignored. François Lerviste, the witness who had been driving just ahead of the Mercedes and saw the blinding flash, gave his initial statement to police hours after the crash. He described what he saw in clear, specific terms, a bright, intense light that filled the tunnel, unlike any camera flash or headlight. He described the white Fiat Uno emerging from the tunnel at high speed. He described the chaos, the sound, the aftermath. But weeks later, Levistre recanted parts of his statement. He told investigators he wasn't sure what he had seen, that the light might have been something else, that he couldn't be certain about the Fiat. When asked why he had changed his story, Levistre was evasive, uncomfortable. Some journalists who tried to interview him reported that he seemed frightened, unwilling to speak on record. Other witnesses experienced similar pressure. Some who had given statements to police describing suspicious activity around the tunnel were never called to testify at official inquiries. Some who agreed to speak to journalists later refused, citing personal reasons or declining to elaborate. The pattern suggested that witnesses were being silenced, either through intimidation or through more subtle forms of coercion. Then there was the issue of the ambulance and the agonisingly slow transport to the hospital. Diana was alive after the crash. She was critically injured, with internal bleeding and damage to her heart, but she was alive. Her pulse was detectable. She was breathing. With immediate medical intervention, she had a chance of survival. Every minute mattered. Every second could mean the difference between life and death. But the ambulance that arrived at the scene did not rush her to the hospital. Instead, it moved slowly, deliberately, stopping multiple times along the route. The journey from the Pont de l'Alma tunnel to the Pitié-Salpêtrière hospital covered a distance of approximately 4 miles. In normal traffic conditions, even with caution, that journey should have taken no more than 10 to 15 minutes. But it took 1 hour and 40 minutes. French emergency medical protocols are different from those in other countries. French medics are trained to stabilise patients on site before transport, prioritising treatment over speed. This approach, known as stay and play, is based on the philosophy that moving a critically injured patient too quickly can worsen their condition. But even accounting for this protocol, the delay in Diana's case was extraordinary. Dr. Frederick Mailles, the first doctor to arrive at the scene, later described his assessment of Diana's condition. She was unconscious but breathing. Her injuries were severe, but I believe she could survive if she received surgical intervention quickly. I stabilised her as best I could, but she needed a hospital. She needed surgery. Time was critical. The ambulance departed the scene at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. It travelled less than half a mile before stopping. Medics administered additional treatment. 20 minutes later, it moved again. Another stop, more treatment. By the time the ambulance reached the hospital, it was nearly 4 o'clock in the morning. Diana's heart had stopped twice during transport. Surgeons worked desperately to save her, but the damage was too severe. She died at 4 o'clock. Medical experts who reviewed the timeline concluded that with faster transport, Diana's chances of survival would have been significantly higher. Dr. David Osborne, a trauma surgeon, stated, "In cases of severe internal bleeding, every minute counts. The goal is to get the patient to an operating room as quickly as possible. Stabilisation is important, but it should not delay transport to the point where the patient's condition deteriorates beyond recovery. In Diana's case, the delay was fatal. Some have speculated that the delay was intentional, designed to ensure Diana did not survive long enough to speak to anyone, to provide a statement, to reveal what had happened in the tunnel. Others believe it was simply a tragic combination of protocol and bad luck. But the fact remains, Diana Spencer died in large part because she did not receive timely medical care. And the question of why the transport was so slow has never been adequately answered. The Mercedes itself raised additional questions that were never thoroughly investigated by official inquiries. The car belonged to the Ritz Hotel, owned by Mohammed Al Fayed. It was part of a fleet of vehicles used to transport VIP guests, but weeks before the crash, the Mercedes had been stolen from outside the hotel. The theft was reported to police, and the car was later recovered. During the recovery process, the vehicle's electronic systems had been repaired. These systems controlled critical functions, including steering, braking, and throttle response. Official investigations never thoroughly examined those repairs. There was no independent verification that the systems had not been tampered with during the theft and recovery period. There was no detailed forensic analysis of the car's electronic control units, which could have revealed signs of sabotage or remote interference. Could someone have sabotaged the car's electronics? Could the crash have been triggered remotely? The technology to interfere with a vehicle's electronic systems existed in 1997. Intelligence agencies had access to such technology. Research into remote vehicle manipulation had been ongoing for years, driven by both defensive and offensive applications. A skilled technician could, in theory, install devices that would allow external control over a vehicle's steering or braking, triggering failures at specific moments. But without a thorough investigation, these questions remained unanswered. The car was examined by French authorities, who concluded that mechanical failure was not a factor in the crash. But the examination was limited, focused primarily on the physical damage from the collision, rather than on the electronic systems that might have been compromised. Trevor Rees-Jones, the sole survivor, might have been able to answer some of these questions, but he remembered nothing. The head injuries he sustained in the crash resulted in complete amnesia about the events leading up to the accident. He could not recall the drive through Paris. He could not recall entering the tunnel. He could not recall the crash itself. His memory was a blank slate, wiped clean by trauma. Rees-Jones spent months recovering in the hospital. His face had to be reconstructed through extensive surgery. When he was finally able to speak, journalists and investigators pressed him for details, hoping that fragments of memory might return. But there was nothing. To this day, Trevor Rees-Jones has no memory of what happened that night. Whether that amnesia was accidental or convenient, no one could say. French authorities conducted their own investigation into the crash, but cooperation with British authorities was minimal. The French report, released in 1999, concluded that the crash was an accident caused by Henri Paul's intoxication and excessive speed. The report acknowledged the white Fiat Uno but stated that it was not a significant factor. It dismissed witness testimony about the blinding flash as unreliable, and it made no mention of intelligence agency activity in the area that night. The British Operation Paget inquiry, conducted years later, echoed the French conclusions, but both investigations left significant questions unanswered. Why were the cameras off? Why was the ambulance so slow? Why was the white Fiat Uno never found? Why did witnesses who saw suspicious activity either refuse to testify or suddenly recant their statements? And why did people connected to the case keep dying under suspicious circumstances? James Anderson, the photographer with the white Fiat Uno, burned to death in his car. Jean-Claude Mules, the forensic officer who handled Henri Paul's blood samples, died by suicide. Several paparazzi who had been at the scene that night died in accidents in the years following the crash. Hotel staff who had been on duty at the Ritz on August 31st died unexpectedly. The death toll was high enough to be statistically anomalous, high enough to suggest that someone was tying up loose ends. But perhaps the most disturbing piece of evidence, the one that suggested a level of planning and coordination far beyond a random accident, was something that Mohammed Al Fayed's investigators uncovered. Through years of persistent digging, references to a sealed French intelligence file codenamed Nightfall Directive, Act 6, the Nightfall Directive. Mohammed Al-Fayed refused to let his son's death be dismissed as an accident. For years he spoke publicly, filed lawsuits and funded investigations. He was ridiculed in the British press, portrayed as a grieving father consumed by conspiracy theories, a man whose wealth and influence had made him paranoid. But Al-Fayed was not interested in public opinion. He was interested in the truth. He hired private investigators, former intelligence officers who understood how covert operations worked and how evidence could be hidden. He hired forensic experts to review the physical evidence from the crash. He hired legal teams to pursue civil cases against the French government and the British establishment. And he funded research into intelligence activities in Paris on the night of August 31st, 1997. One of those investigators, a former French intelligence officer who agreed to speak only on the condition of anonymity, uncovered references to something called the Nightfall Directive. The references appeared in fragments, mentions in classified files that the investigator accessed through contacts still working within French intelligence. The files themselves were sealed, classified at the highest levels, and beyond the reach of any official inquiry or legal process. According to the investigator, the Nightfall Directive was a protocol document outlining procedures for non-lethal neutralization of uncontrolled high-visibility assets. In plain language, how to quietly remove someone too famous to arrest, too influential to ignore, and too dangerous to allow to continue operating freely. The investigator described the contents in vague terms, unable or unwilling to provide specifics. The directive outlined methods for staging accidents, manipulating investigations, and managing media narratives. It covered everything from target selection to post-operation cleanup. The goal was not merely to eliminate the target, but to ensure that their elimination appeared natural or accidental, preventing martyrdom and public backlash. If such a document existed, and if it had been applied to Diana Spencer, it would explain almost everything. The choice of location, a tunnel, controlled and enclosed. The method, a car crash, common and plausible. The collateral damage, Dodie and Henri Paul. Acceptable losses that reinforce the narrative of tragedy. The survivor, Trevor Rees-Jones, left alive but with no memory, unable to contradict the official story. The rapid cleanup, no cameras, no forensic evidence, no loose ends. French authorities refused to confirm or deny the existence of the Nightfall Directive. British authorities claimed no knowledge of it. Journalists who tried to investigate were met with silence, denials, or threats of legal action. The document, if it existed, remained hidden, buried in archives that would never be opened. But the investigator provided one additional detail, something that connected the Nightfall Directive to specific intelligence operations. The directive referenced coordination between Allied intelligence services. It was not a French document alone. It involved MI6, the CIA, and French intelligence working together on operations deemed necessary for national security. Diana was not the only target mentioned, but she was one of them. This claim, if true, meant that Diana's death was not the result of a single rogue operation, but part of a broader framework for managing problematic individuals. It meant that intelligence agencies from multiple countries had protocols in place for eliminating targets without detection. And it meant that Diana Spencer, for all her fame and influence, had been classified as expendable. But evidence of such a conspiracy was nearly impossible to obtain. Intelligence agencies operate in shadows, leaving no paper trails, no witnesses, no evidence that can be used against them. Even whistleblowers like Richard Tomlinson and David Shayler, who risked their careers and freedom to speak out, could provide only fragments, pieces of a puzzle that would never be fully assembled. Yet the fragments kept appearing. In 2021, additional declassified documents emerged from American intelligence archives. The documents, released under Freedom of Information Act requests, provided more context about the surveillance of Diana in the months before her death. One document, a CIA cable dated August of 1997, discussed coordination with MI6 on monitoring and containment protocols for high-visibility targets whose actions posed reputational risks. The cable specifically mentioned Diana Spencer, noting her relationship with Dodi Fayed and her ongoing humanitarian work, which the cable described as increasingly problematic. Another document, a memo from the National Security Council, referenced a meeting between American, British and French intelligence officials in July of 1997. The subject of the meeting was listed as HVT Management, an acronym for High Value Target Management. Diana's name did not appear in the memo, but the timing and the participants suggested that she was one of the targets under discussion. The documents did not explicitly mention assassination. The language was bureaucratic, filled with euphemisms and coded phrases, but the implication was clear. Diana was being monitored, assessed, and discussed as a problem that might require intervention. And less than 2 months after that meeting, she was dead. Critics of the conspiracy theories argue that the documents prove nothing, that monitoring a high-profile individual is standard practice for intelligence agencies, and that there is no direct evidence linking that surveillance to her death. They point out that the official investigations found no credible evidence of assassination, that the forensic evidence supports the accident narrative, and that conspiracy theories are fueled by grief and a refusal to accept random tragedy. But supporters of the conspiracy theories argue that the patterns are too consistent to ignore. The warnings Diana gave years before her death, the letter predicting a car accident and head injury, the witnesses who saw suspicious activity and then recanted or disappeared, the white Fiat Uno that was never found, the cameras that all malfunctioned simultaneously, the ambulance that took nearly 2 hours to travel 4 miles, the deaths of key witnesses, the intelligence activity in Paris that night, the surveillance documents, the references to containment protocols. Taken individually, each piece of evidence can be explained away as coincidence, misunderstanding or procedural error. But taken together they form a picture of something much darker, a planned operation carried out with precision, designed to eliminate a target who had become too dangerous to leave alive. And at the centre of it all was Diana Spencer, a woman who had spent her life challenging power, speaking truth and refusing to be silenced. A woman who knew she was in danger and said so repeatedly. A woman who died exactly as she had feared, in a car crash that was immediately labelled an accident, but never felt like one. Act 7. The theory that survived. Conspiracy theories about Diana's death have persisted for over 2 decades. Some are absurd, fueled by grief, and a refusal to accept that someone so beloved could die in such a random, senseless way. But some theories are grounded in evidence, supported by witness testimony, and consistent with the known capabilities of intelligence agencies. The theory that has survived, the one that refuses to die despite official denials and public ridicule, is this: Diana Spencer was killed in a planned operation carried out by British intelligence, possibly with assistance from French and American agencies. The method was a staged car crash designed to appear accidental. The motive was to prevent her from marrying Dodi Fayed, a union that would have been politically and culturally unacceptable to the British establishment, and to silence her before she could reveal damaging information about the royal family and connected interests. The operation followed a protocol that may have been outlined in a document like the Nightfall Directive. The key elements of the plan were selection of a controlled environment. The Pont de l'Alma tunnel was chosen because it was enclosed, predictable, and isolated. Variables could be managed. Surveillance could be disabled. The location offered the control necessary to stage an accident that would appear random. Use of a blinding light to cause the driver to lose control. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a bright, intense flash inside the tunnel just before the crash. This is consistent with Richard Tomlinson's testimony about MI6 methods for causing car accidents. A high-intensity strobe light, triggered at the right moment, would blind the driver, causing them to lose control without leaving any forensic evidence. Introduction of a collision vehicle. The white Fiat Uno, likely driven by an asset like James Anderson, was used to force the Mercedes off course. The collision would create additional chaos, making the crash appear more random and harder to reconstruct forensically. Tampering with the target vehicle. The recent theft and recovery of the Mercedes provided an opportunity to sabotage the car's electronic systems. While official investigations did not find evidence of tampering, they also did not conduct a thorough forensic analysis of the electronic control units that might have revealed signs of interference. Ensuring collateral damage. Dodi Fayed and Henri Paul were acceptable losses. Their deaths would reinforce the narrative of the tragic accident, making it harder for anyone to argue that Diana had been specifically targeted, leaving one survivor with no memory. Trevor Rees-Jones survived, but with complete amnesia. He could not contradict the official story because he had no memory of what happened. Whether his amnesia was accidental or the result of carefully calibrated force is impossible to determine. Controlling the aftermath. The malfunctioning cameras ensured no video evidence. The slow ambulance transport ensured Diana did not survive long enough to provide a statement. The rapid official narrative ensured the media and the public accepted the accident explanation before questions could be raised. Eliminating loose ends. Witnesses and individuals connected to the case who might have revealed inconvenient truths died under suspicious circumstances in the years following the crash. James Anderson, Jean-Claude Mules and others were silenced permanently. This theory is not proven. It may never be proven. Intelligence agencies do not leave evidence of their operations. Documents are destroyed or classified. Witnesses are silenced. Investigations are controlled. But the theory is consistent with the evidence, the inconsistencies, and the pattern of behaviour exhibited by intelligence agencies when dealing with high-profile targets. And the theory is consistent with what Diana herself believed. She knew she was in danger. She wrote it down. She told her friends. She predicted her own death years before it happened. And everything she feared came true in a tunnel in Paris on August 31st, 1997. The world was told it was an accident, a drunk driver, a paparazzi chase, bad luck. But Diana knew better. She had always known. Ending, the final symbol. The flame of liberty stands above the Pont de l'Alma tunnel, a golden torch reaching toward the sky. It is 12 feet tall, covered in gold leaf, gleaming in the sunlight by day and illuminated by spotlights at night. It was erected in 1989 as a gift from the United States to France, symbolising the friendship between the two nations and the universal value of freedom. It is an exact replica, scaled to full size, of the torch held by the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbour. It represents enlightenment, truth, and the freedom to speak without fear. After Diana's death, the flame became an unofficial memorial. No one planned it. No one announced it. But people began leaving flowers at its base, bouquets of roses and lilies piled against the stone pedestal. They left notes, handwritten letters expressing grief and love. They left photographs of Diana, images of her smiling, holding children, walking through minefields. The flame, which had nothing to do with Diana in its original purpose, became inseparable from her memory. Today, tourists visit the flame every day. They come from around the world, drawn by the story of the princess who died too young. They take photographs. They leave flowers. Many don't know that the tunnel where Diana took her last breath is directly beneath their feet. They see the flame as a memorial, a place to mourn, a symbol of loss. But conspiracy theorists see something else. They see the symbolism as intentional, a message left by those who planned the operation. The flame of liberty, representing freedom of speech and truth, stands directly above the site where one of the most outspoken women in the world was silenced. Freedom, the message suggests, dies quietly under the light. Truth is buried beneath gold and stone, and those who speak too loudly, who challenge power too openly, meet their end in darkness while the world mourns above. Whether the symbolism is intentional or coincidental, whether it was chosen deliberately or emerged by accident, it is haunting. Diana Spencer spent her life using her voice to challenge power, to advocate for the vulnerable, and to speak truth that others wanted hidden. She walked through minefields, held dying patients, confronted injustice, and refused to be silenced by protocol or fear. And in the end, she died in a place that would become forever associated with a flame meant to represent the very freedom she embodied. If Diana's death was an accident, it was a tragic convergence of bad decisions, bad luck, and bad timing. It silenced the most loved woman on earth in an instant, robbing the world of a voice that had inspired millions. It left her sons without a mother, her friends without a companion, and the world without a champion for those who had no voice of their own. But if it wasn't an accident, if it was an operation carried out by those who found her inconvenient, then the silence was the point. Silence her voice, silence her influence, silence her before she could reveal what she knew, before she could marry the wrong person, before she could challenge the system any further, and ensure that the official story, repeated endlessly through media and government channels, drowns out the questions that refuse to go away. The truth about what happened in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel may never be fully known. Too much evidence is missing. Too many witnesses are dead. Too many documents are classified. Too many people with the power to reveal what really happened have chosen silence instead. But the questions remain, persistent and unanswered, like the flame that burns above the tunnel. They are asked by investigators who refuse to accept the official narrative. They are asked by friends who heard Diana's warnings and watched them come true. They are asked by ordinary people who looked at the evidence and saw patterns that didn't fit the story of a simple accident. Was it an accident? Or was it murder dressed as one? Diana Spencer cannot answer. She took her secrets, her knowledge, and her fears to a hospital room in Paris where doctors fought desperately to save her and failed. But her voice, in some ways, remains. Her letter, written years before her death, speaks for her across time. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure and serious head injury. She knew, she warned, and she died exactly as she feared. The flame of liberty burns on day and night, season after season, year after year. It has become a symbol of Diana herself, bright, enduring, impossible to extinguish. Beneath it, in the darkness of the tunnel, the 13th pillar stands as a reminder of a crash that took 3 lives, a reminder of a woman who refused to be controlled, and a reminder that some truths are too dangerous to be spoken, too inconvenient to be acknowledged, and too powerful to be allowed to survive. Diana Spencer once said, "I don't go by the rule book. I lead from the heart, not the head." She lived by that principle, following her instincts, trusting her compassion, and challenging anyone who told her to stay silent. And in a world controlled by people who valued order over truth, who prized stability over justice, that made her dangerous. If it was an accident, it silenced the most loved woman on earth. If it wasn't, that silence was the point. And above the tunnel, the flame burns on, a symbol of the freedoms Diana fought for and the silence that consumed her. A memorial to a princess. A warning to those who speak too loudly. And a question mark that will never be erased. What really happened that night in Paris? The world was given an answer. Whether it was the truth is something each person must decide for themselves. But Diana knew, she always knew, and in the end she was right. They moved with efficient, brutal precision that spoke of years of practice and unlimited resources. Men in dark tactical gear emblazoned with HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, flooded her apartment like a coordinated invasion force. They carried electronic jammers that immediately killed her internet connection and cell phone signal, ensuring that no evidence of the raid could be transmitted to the outside world. Mara didn't resist. She couldn't. The revelation of her own name in the exercise documents had shattered something fundamental in her understanding of reality. She sat frozen in her chair as they systematically dismantled her entire investigation, bagging computers, hard drives, printed documents, and the original VHS tape that had started everything. Mara Ellison, the team leader announced, his voice carrying the flat, bureaucratic authority of someone who had recited these words many times before. You are being detained under the Espionage Act and the provisions of the Patriot Act for the unauthorized access of classified material and conspiracy to aid terrorist entities in their ongoing operations against the United States. The charges were absurd, but Mara understood that absurdity was the point. In the post-9/11 legal framework, the government's definition of terrorism had expanded to include almost any activity that challenged official narratives. Her research, her questions, her very curiosity had been redefined as acts of treason. As they led her out in handcuffs, past the terrified faces of neighbours who would remember her as the woman who had turned out to be a spy, Mara caught a glimpse of someone watching from across the street. It was Kellerman, the man from the cafe, observing her arrest with the detached professionalism of someone monitoring a completed operation. Their eyes met for a brief moment and he nodded slightly, not in greeting or sympathy, but in acknowledgement, a confirmation that everything had proceeded according to plan. The government's case against her was presented in a sealed FISA court, where neither the evidence nor the proceedings were accessible to public scrutiny. They had documentation of her accessing classified servers, recordings of her encrypted communications with foreign assets like at Radar Ghost, and her own research notes that they characterized as intelligence gathering for hostile entities. They presented her investigation not as the work of a concerned citizen or independent researcher, but as a sophisticated espionage operation designed to undermine public confidence in government institutions and aid terrorist recruitment. Every question she had asked was reframed as an attack on national security. Every fact she had uncovered was presented as intelligence that could be used against American interests. The judge, operating under national security guidelines that prioritise state secrets over due process, sentenced her to indefinite detention in ADX Florence, the federal supermax facility designed to make dangerous criminals disappear from the world. She was classified as a Level 6 terrorist, a designation that eliminated most constitutional protections and ensured that she would spend the rest of her life in solitary confinement. But something unexpected happened in the weeks following her arrest. Fragments of her research began appearing online, leaked to conspiracy theory websites and alternative media platforms in carefully edited chunks. Anonymous accounts uploaded her audio analysis comparing the ATC recordings, her financial charts tracking the put options, and scanned pages from Dr. Thorne's suppressed paper. The leaks were incomplete and disconnected, presenting tantalizing glimpses of a larger truth without providing the comprehensive narrative that Mara had spent months constructing. Each fragment raised more questions than it answered, creating a puzzle that thousands of amateur researchers began trying to solve. The story spread through the conspiracy theory ecosystem with viral intensity. Mara Ellison became a martyred truth-teller, a patriotic whistleblower who had been silenced by a tyrannical government for asking inconvenient questions. Her name appeared on protest signs and bumper stickers. Her fragmented research became the foundational text of a new generation of 9/11 truth-seekers who built elaborate theories around the gaps in her evidence. Online forums dedicated to her case attracted hundreds of thousands of members who spent countless hours analysing every leaked document, enhancing every audio file, and connecting dots that may or may not have been related. The movement consumed enormous amounts of time and energy from people who might otherwise have been investigating more immediate and actionable forms of government corruption. In her solitary cell, staring at concrete walls that never varied, Mara had years to think about what had really happened to her. She had access to limited reading materials, carefully selected books and magazines that were screened for security risks, but no internet, no phone calls, and no contact with the outside world except for monthly visits from a government-appointed psychiatrist who documented her mental state for official records. During those long, empty hours, she began to understand the true sophistication of the operation she had been part of. The evidence she had uncovered was real. The financial anomalies, the radar substitutions, the media manipulation had all been genuine. But her discovery of them hadn't been accidental. She had been led to each revelation by a carefully constructed trail that had made her feel like an independent investigator while actually being a participant in a psychological experiment. The goal wasn't to suppress inconvenient truths about September 11th. It was to manage them, to ensure that people who asked dangerous questions were given satisfying, but ultimately harmless answers that would occupy their attention without threatening the real power structures that had profited from the attacks. Her research had been allowed to develop just far enough to create compelling conspiracy theories, but not far enough to identify the specific individuals and institutions that were actually responsible. She had mapped the edges of the conspiracy while being carefully steered away from its centre. The 9/11 truth movement that had grown around her, leaked research was exactly what the system needed. A large, vocal, but ultimately marginalised group that absorbed dissent and channeled it into harmless activities like conference presentations, documentary films and internet discussions. The conspiracy theorists served as controlled opposition, providing an outlet for skepticism while ensuring that genuine investigation was drowned in a sea of speculation and theory. But perhaps most insidiously, her case had established a precedent for the treatment of future researchers. Anyone who began asking serious questions about government actions would be confronted with the example of Mara Ellison, the translator who had thought she was uncovering truth, but had actually been playing a role in an elaborate deception, and who had ended up spending her life in prison for crimes she didn't understand she was committing. The message was clear. The cost of curiosity was too high, the risk of investigation was too great, and the line between research and treason was too thin for ordinary citizens to navigate safely. Years passed in the unchanging routine of maximum security imprisonment. Mara aged in her cell, her dark hair going grey, her body adapting to the constraints of a space designed to contain rather than rehabilitate. She developed the 1,000-yard stare common to long-term solitary confinement, a psychological adjustment to environmental deprivation that allowed consciousness to survive even when hope had been systematically eliminated. But her mind remained sharp and she continued to think about the implications of her experience. If her investigation had been managed from the beginning, if her discoveries had been strategically placed for her to find, then how many other conspiracy theories were actually psychological operations designed to misdirect public attention? How many whistleblowers had been selected and groomed for their role? How many leaked documents were authentic information released in carefully controlled ways to create the illusion of transparency while actually deepening the confusion? How many truth seekers were unwittingly serving the interests of the very systems they believed they were opposing? The questions haunted her, but they also provided a strange form of comfort. Even in prison, even stripped of freedom and identity, she was still thinking, still analysing, still trying to understand the shape of the cage that had been built around human consciousness. In her 10th year of imprisonment, Mara received an unexpected visitor. The guard who escorted her to the visitation room was apologetic. Visits were rare, and this one hadn't been scheduled through normal channels. The visitor was a young woman, perhaps 25, with the intense focus and slightly manic energy that Mara recognised in herself from decades earlier. "Ms. Ellison," the woman said, speaking quickly as if afraid their time would be cut short. "My name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've been researching your case for the past 3 years, and I think I've found something important. Something about Building 7 that nobody has ever." Mara held up her hand, stopping the young woman mid-sentence. Through the reinforced glass that separated them, she looked into Rebecca's eager, determined face, and saw herself at the beginning of a journey that could only end in this same room on the other side of the same glass. Ms. Torres, Mara said quietly, her voice rough from years of disuse. Let me ask you something. How did you first learn about my case? What was the first piece of evidence that made you think there was a story worth investigating? Rebecca's enthusiasm was undimmed. It was a video file that was posted anonymously to a secure drop site, footage of Building 7 that I'd never seen before, with audio that hadn't been available in any of the official archives. The timing discrepancies were obvious once you knew what to look for. Mara closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair. Another tape, another anomaly, another researcher being led down a carefully prepared path that would feel like discovery, while actually being manipulation. Ms. Torres, she said, opening her eyes and looking directly at the young filmmaker, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, and then I need you to walk out of here, delete whatever research you've done and never think about any of this again. But even as she spoke, Mara knew it was hopeless. Rebecca Torres had the same look in her eyes that Mara had once seen in her own mirror, the absolute certainty that she was on the verge of uncovering a truth that would change everything. The same conviction that had led Mara to spend 20 years in a cage built from her own curiosity. The cycle would continue. New researchers would be recruited, new evidence would be strategically placed, new truth seekers would be transformed into unwitting participants in their own imprisonment. The conspiracy wasn't just about what had happened on September 11th. It was about what happened to anyone who tried to look too closely at power, who asked too many questions, who believed that truth was something that could be found rather than something that was manufactured. As the guard led her back to her cell, Mara realised that she had finally understood the true scope of the operation she had been part of. It wasn't a conspiracy to hide a single crime. It was a system for managing reality itself, for ensuring that the truth would always be whatever those in power needed it to be. The smoke behind the towers wasn't just the debris of a single day's deception. It was the fog of war in a conflict that most people didn't even know was being fought. A war against the very possibility of independent thought, waged with weapons of information and cages built from curiosity itself. And in that war, every truth seeker was both a casualty and a weapon, both a victim and an unwitting soldier in an army that was fighting against its own cause. The tape that shouldn't exist had led her exactly where it was supposed to lead her, into a truth that was indistinguishable from a lie, a cage that was built from the very evidence that had seemed to promise freedom. In the end, Mara Ellison had found exactly what she was looking for, and that, perhaps, was the most terrifying revelation of all. The smoke behind the towers, an extended investigation. What if the single most defining event of the 21st century wasn't what we were told? We've all seen the footage, heard the official story, and lived with the consequences. But what happens when a single piece of evidence lost in the system for over 2 decades falls into the hands of the one person with the skills and obsession to see the cracks in the narrative? This is not a story about easy answers. It's a story about the questions that can unravel a reality. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to Sleep Theories and hit the notification bell. We dive deep into the world's greatest mysteries, and what you're about to read will have you questioning everything. In the comments below, let us know. After learning about the inconsistencies, what's the one piece of the 9/11 puzzle that never sat right with you? Now settle in. This is the smoke behind the towers. The dust in Mara Ellison's apartment was a library of dead projects. It settled on the spines of German legal dictionaries, coated the cooling fins of her overworked computer, and formed a fine grey film on the stacked plastic boxes of government transcripts that were her livelihood. The apartment itself was a testament to organised chaos. Cables snaking between translation equipment, multiple keyboards in different alphabets, and towers of reference materials that threatened to topple with each vibration from the subway below. Mara was a freelance translator, a ghost in the machine of bureaucracy, hired for her fluency in 5 languages and her singular, obsessive attention to detail. She didn't just translate words, she translated context, subtext, and the terrifying silence between official lines. Her clients range from immigration lawyers needing farcy depositions, translated to federal agencies requiring real-time interpretation of intercepted communications. It was solitary work that suited her temperament. She'd always been more comfortable with the precision of language than the chaos of human interaction. The package from the Department of Defense's Archival Division was standard. A reinforced cardboard box, a chain of custody form clipped to the top, and inside 12 VHS tapes labelled with alphanumeric codes denoting a declassified batch of field communications from the early 2000s. The accompanying documentation was sparse. A single-page memo requesting translation of any foreign language chatter captured in the background. The pay was modest but steady, and Mara had developed a reputation for catching linguistic details that others missed. Her workspace was a shrine to analogue precision. The professional-grade VCR, a Sony model worth more than most people's cars, sat connected to a digital audio interface that allowed her to isolate frequency ranges and enhance muffled conversations. Multiple monitors displayed waveform analysis software alongside translation databases. She worked methodically, her headphones sealing her in a world of static, fragmented Farsi, Arabic phrases, and the ambient hum of old magnetic tape. The first 11 tapes were unremarkable. Routine military communications, helicopter pilots discussing weather conditions, occasional snippets of foreign languages that were either too corrupted to translate or turned out to be harmless civilian chatter picked up by sensitive equipment. She documented everything with academic precision, noting timestamps, speaker identifications, and confidence levels for her translations. Tape 7 was different from the moment she picked it up. Its label, DOD-AFC-0, 91101-BROLL-4, was slightly smudged, the ink appearing fresher than the others despite the identical date stamps. The B-roll designation caught her attention, typically used for supplementary footage, background material that never made it to air. September 11th, 2001 was faded but legible in the corner, written in what looked like different handwriting than the official labels. She slotted it into the VCR with the reverence of an archaeologist handling a fragile artifact, and pressed play. The screen fizzed to life with the chaotic, familiar horror of that morning. But this wasn't the sanitized, repeatedly broadcast footage that had been burned into collective memory. This was raw, unprocessed, shot from what appeared to be a news helicopter hovering at an angle she'd never seen before. The North Tower bled a furious black plume into a perfect blue sky, but the colours were wrong. They were too vivid, too saturated, as if the horror had been amplified by the unfiltered lens. Her trained eye, honed by years of spotting inconsistencies in testimony and documentation, caught it immediately. In the lower third of the frame, a timecode burned into the tape read 08:42:17 Eastern Standard Time. She knew the official timeline by heart. American Airlines. Flight 11 had struck the North Tower at 8:46 a.m, a 4-minute discrepancy. A chill, small and precise, traced a path down her spine. Technical errors were common in archival footage, she rationalised. Equipment malfunctions, camera operators forgetting to sync their timestamps. She'd seen it hundreds of times in legal depositions where security cameras showed impossible timelines. But as she continued watching, the discrepancy held. The timecode advanced in perfect synchronization with real time, never jumping or resetting. This wasn't a technical glitch. It was consistent, deliberate, accurate. And if it was accurate, then everything she knew about that morning was built on a foundation of sand. Then she heard the voices. They were not the panicked cries of civilians or the frantic dispatches of news anchors that had filled the airwaves. These voices were cool, professional, crackling with the distinct compression of military-grade communication systems. They were barely audible under the rotor wash and wind noise, but her equipment could isolate and enhance them. Command, this is Skywatch. Confirmed scenario is live. Repeat, is this Vigilant Guardian live or real world? The voice was young, male, with the clipped precision of military training but an undertone of confusion that made Mara's pulse quicken. A pause, filled with the sound of roaring fire and distant sirens. When the response came, it was from a different voice, older, calmer, carrying the authority of rank. Maintain exercise protocol. All units, This is a live fly exercise. Treat all tracks as simulated until otherwise notified. The first voice came back, strain creeping in. Skywatch copies. Maintaining protocol. Jesus, that's a lot of smoke for a simulation. Another voice joined the channel, different again, with a slight accent she couldn't immediately place. Command. Falcon 2 requesting permission to vector intercept on the southern track. We show multiple bogies, but exercise parameters did not account for this density. Negative Falcon 2. Maintain exercise posture. All tracks are part of the scenario until command confirms otherwise. Mara's breath caught in her throat. Vigilant Guardian. The name meant nothing to her, but the context was unmistakable. They were talking about an exercise, a drill, at the exact moment when the real attack was unfolding. The confusion in their voices was genuine. They couldn't tell what was real and what was simulation. She rewound the tape, listening again with professional focus. The voices were too clear to be atmospheric noise, too organised to be random civilian communications. This was operational military chatter, recorded at the highest levels of the response hierarchy. And according to the time code, it was happening before the official narrative said the first plane had even hit. The camera panned, and she saw the South Tower in the background, pristine and untouched. According to every official record, every news report, every commission finding, the South Tower would remain undamaged for another 17 minutes. But these military voices were already talking about multiple targets, exercise protocols, and maintaining simulation status. The official story was a solid wall, a monument of accepted fact constructed from thousands of testimonies, investigations and reports. But this tape was a hairline fracture in the granite. It was a glimpse of the scaffolding behind the monument, the framework that held up the official truth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of bone. The rational part of her mind insisted this was a mislabeled tape, a bureaucratic error. Her contract was explicit about mishandled materials. They were to be reported immediately, returned to the appropriate authorities for proper classification review. But curiosity, that quiet, relentless engine that had driven her through graduate school and into a career built on uncovering meaning in chaos, overrode the fear. She didn't eject the tape. Instead, she connected it to her digital capture system and began making a perfect copy, frame by frame, preserving every pixel and every audio sample. The chill in her spine had become a frozen river, carrying with it the terrible realization that she was holding something that could unravel everything. This tape shouldn't exist, and she knew, with the terrifying certainty of someone who has spent a lifetime connecting dots that others refused to see, that she could never unsee what was on it. As the tape played on, she began taking meticulous notes, documenting call signs, voice patterns, and radio procedures. The military communications continued throughout the footage, painting a picture of an operation that was simultaneously a drill and a real-world crisis, a Schrödinger's catastrophe where reality and simulation existed in quantum superposition, until someone with the authority to collapse the wave function decided what was real. That someone, she was beginning to suspect, was not who the world thought it was. Sleep didn't come. The images played on the backs of her eyelids in an endless loop. The impossibly blue sky, the black smoke billowing against it, the time code burning like a digital scar across her vision. The voices echoed in her memory, their professional calm masking confusion that ran deeper than anyone had ever admitted publicly. By 5 a.m, she was at her desk, the glow of her monitors the only light in the pre-dawn gloom of her apartment. The city outside was beginning its daily resurrection, but Mara existed in a different timeline now, one where the morning of September 11th, 2001 was not history, but an active investigation. Her first stop was the public archive of the 9/11 Commission, a digital tomb containing thousands of pages of testimony, exhibits, and evidence. She had accessed these files before for various translation projects, but now she approached them with the focus of a detective rather than a linguist. The official transcripts were sanitized, edited for clarity and context, with extensive redactions that created black holes in the narrative where sensitive information had been surgically removed. But buried deep in a subsidiary server, linked through footnotes and cross-references that most casual researchers would never follow, she found the motherlode. Raw audio files from air traffic control centres. These were the unedited feeds from Boston Center, New York Terminal Radar Approach Control and Cleveland Center, the front lines of confusion that morning. She put on her professional headphones, the world fading away as she prepared to immerse herself in the chaos. The audio quality was poor, compressed through multiple digital transfers over 2 decades, but her equipment could clean it up. She opened her spectrum analysis software and began the painstaking process of isolating individual voices from the cacophony. The first recordings were exactly what she expected. Controllers struggling to understand what was happening to American Airlines Flight 11. The standard protocols were breaking down in real time as they tried to re-establish contact with a plane that was no longer responding to their calls. American 11, Boston Center, are you there? The controller's voice was professional but edged with the first hints of concern. Static filled the channel. American 11, Boston Center, please respond. More urgent now, the procedural calm beginning to crack. Then a new voice entered the channel, higher pitched, laced with confusion. Boston Center, this is New York approach. We're showing a primary target, fast mover, not squawking transponder. Is this part of the Nordo drill? Nordo, no radio communications. Mara's blood turned to ice water. The Boston controller's response was immediate and sharp. What drill? I don't have anything about a drill on the roster today. What's your location on that primary? Another voice cut in. Different frequency, probably a pilot monitoring emergency channels. Center, this is Delta 243 Heavy. We're hearing some strange chatter on guard frequency. Are we exercising today? Our dispatcher didn't mention anything. Delta 243, stand by. We're trying to sort out some communication issues with one of our aircraft. But the pilot pressed. Center, serious question. We're showing traffic on our TCAS that doesn't correlate with what you're calling out. Our system is painting targets where you're not showing anything. Is this part of some kind of exercise? The timestamp on this exchange was 8:43 a.m., 3 minutes before the official time of impact. The confusion wasn't happening after the attack. It was the environment in which the attack was unfolding. The system was already compromised, already uncertain about what was real and what was simulation. Mara spent the next 16 hours obsessively comparing this raw audio to the sanitized news footage from that morning, using professional editing software to align timelines with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. She created a split-screen comparison, audio waveforms on one side, video timestamps on the other, and she found them, the edits. In the raw ATC tape, a controller could be heard screaming, "He's descending fast, passing 9,000 rate of descent. Jesus Christ, what the hell is he?" The audio cut out completely for exactly 0.2 of a second. A perfect digital slice that could only have been made in post-production. When it resumed, a different controller was speaking in measured professional tones. "We have an aircraft emergency, requesting immediate vectors for emergency descent." The panic had been surgically removed, replaced with standard phraseology that suggested control rather than chaos. She found 17 such edits in the first hour of ATC audio alone. Each one removed confusion, uncertainty, or references to exercises and drills. The real-time breakdown of the air traffic control system had been edited into a narrative of professionals responding to an unprecedented but comprehensible crisis. But the video footage revealed even more sophisticated manipulation. She had obtained raw news helicopter footage from multiple sources, some from official archives, others from amateur collectors who had recorded the live broadcasts. Frame-stepping through a raw feed uploaded by a news photographer years later, she discovered something that made her hands shake. The famous shot of the second impact, broadcast live to millions, showed the plane entering the frame and striking the South Tower in one continuous motion. But in the unedited raw footage, there was a discontinuity. 3 frames before the impact, the camera jerked violently downward, as if the operator had been startled or knocked off balance, showing the streets below for exactly 1/8 of a second before cutting back to the tower. just in time to capture the fireball. It was a blink and you miss it edit, but once she saw it, she couldn't unsee it. The live broadcast had been edited in real time, with a buffer delay that allowed editors to remove the moment of human shock and replace it with a perfect, unobstructed view of the impact. The audience of one in her dusty apartment was now facing a terrifying possibility. The news wasn't just reporting the event, it was curating it in real time, managing the narrative as it unfolded, ensuring that the world saw exactly what someone wanted them to see. The difference between what happened and what was broadcast might be measured in fractions of seconds, but those fractions contained entire universes of meaning. She pulled up the official timeline, cross-referencing it with her growing database of anomalies. The pattern was clear. Every moment of confusion, every instance where the official response system revealed its underlying chaos, had been carefully edited out of the historical record. What remained was a streamlined narrative of surprise, response and tragedy, clean enough to build policy on, coherent enough to justify the reshaping of an entire civilization. But the real story was in the gaps, in the deleted seconds where the facade slipped and revealed the machinery underneath. The tape she had found wasn't just evidence of poor timekeeping or sloppy journalism. It was proof that someone had been editing history in real time, sculpting reality as it unfolded, ensuring that the official story would be the only story that survived. The question that now consumed her was simple and terrible. If they were editing the news as it happened, what else were they controlling? The digital rabbit hole led her inevitably to the physical world. Knowledge had a weight, she realised, and after 3 days of staring at screens, she needed to feel the heft of actual books, the texture of paper that had existed before the internet had made all information suspect. The New York Public Library's Science, Industry and Business Library was a temple to pre-digital knowledge, its research floors filled with bound periodicals and technical journals that predated the homogenization of online information. She took the subway through the early morning darkness, hyper-aware of every face, every reflection in the train windows, the paranoia now a constant background hum in her consciousness. She requested archived journals from the American Society of Civil Engineers, Structural Engineering International, and the Journal of Constructional Steel Research, focusing on publications from late 2001 through 2003. The librarian, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who seemed to exist in permanent twilight, led her to a research carrel buried deep in the stacks. The official reports were unequivocal and had been cited thousands of times. The intense jet fuel fires had softened the steel structural members, causing thermal expansion that pushed the floor joists off their supports. The floors pancaked down onto each other in a progressive collapse that accelerated due to the increasing mass and momentum. It was tragic but straightforward physics. Fire weakens steel, gravity does the rest. But in the months immediately following the attacks, before the official narrative had crystallized and academic careers had been threatened, a different conversation was happening in the margins of professional literature. She found letters to the editor, brief technical notes, and transcripts from early conferences where structural engineers voiced quiet, professional skepticism. One article, published in a now-defunct journal called Structural Integrity Review, bore the innocuous title, Anomalies in the WTC Collapse Dynamics, a Preliminary Analysis. The author was Dr. Aris Thorne, a professor of structural engineering at Northwestern University with 40 years of experience in high-rise design and failure analysis. Dr. Thorne's analysis was methodical and damning. Using basic principles of physics and publicly available measurements, he demonstrated that the towers had fallen through the path of greatest resistance, the undamaged lower floors and the intact core columns at virtually freefall speed. For that to happen, he argued, the structural resistance had to have been removed almost entirely and almost simultaneously. The observed collapse is consistent with the near instantaneous failure of critical load-bearing elements across multiple floors, he wrote. This failure mode is not consistent with thermal effects from hydrocarbon fires, which would create non-uniform heating and progressive failure. It is, however, consistent with controlled demolition techniques designed to minimize structural resistance during collapse. He included mathematical models showing that even if the fires had weakened the steel by 50%, far more than the official reports claimed, the remaining structure should have provided significant resistance to collapse. The floors should have fallen irregularly, the core columns should have remained standing, and the overall collapse time should have been significantly longer. It is akin to a car falling through the bottom of a multi-storey parking garage, he wrote, with each floor providing progressively less resistance, despite having suffered no structural damage. The physics simply do not support the official explanation. The article was peer-reviewed and published in March 2002. 3 months later, Dr. Thorne's research funding was terminated. By the end of the year, the journal itself had ceased publication, its parent organisation citing financial difficulties and changing market conditions. But Mara's investigation revealed a more complex story. Cross-referencing the journal's subscription database with the author affiliations in Dr. Thorne's article, she discovered that 7 of the 12 peer reviewers who had approved the paper were subsequently denied tenure, transferred to non-research positions, or had their federal funding mysteriously disappear. The systematic dismantling of the academic infrastructure that had supported the questioning of the official narrative was surgical in its precision. Dr. Thorne himself became her new obsession. His university profile, archived on the Internet Wayback Machine, showed a distinguished career spanning 4 decades, with over 200 published papers and millions of dollars in research grants. But in early 2002, his page was updated to show that he had taken an indefinite sabbatical for personal reasons. She dug deeper, following a trail through archived academic mailing lists, conference proceedings, and professional networking sites. The last traces of Dr. Thorne's professional existence were found in a niche engineering message board devoted to structural failure analysis. The forum had been active from 1997 to 2003, when it was apparently taken offline permanently. But Mara had learned to look in the forgotten corners of the internet, the places where data went to die but never quite disappeared. Using advanced search techniques and cached page reconstructions, she found fragments of the discussion threads. Dr. Thorne's final posts were increasingly frantic in tone. He described pressure from university administrators, threats to his family's safety, and mysterious visitors who claimed to be federal investigators but carried no proper identification. His last post, dated September 15, 2002, exactly 1 year and 4 days after the attacks, was brief and chilling. The data is the data. Mathematical models don't lie. Steel doesn't care about politics, and gravity is not a government agency. They can threaten my funding, my reputation, even my family. But they can't change the laws of physics. I've said all I can. To those still listening, they're watching. I suggest you all be careful what you look for. You might not like what finds you back. He never posted again. A follow-up news search revealed a brief article from the Chicago Tribune, buried on page 7 of the Metro section 6 months later. University professor missing, foul play not suspected. The article was perfunctory, almost dismissive. Dr. Thorne had been reported missing by his sister when he failed to appear for Christmas dinner. His car was found at O'Hare Airport, keys in the ignition, a plane ticket to Vancouver in his name unused at the gate. Professor Thorne had been under considerable stress related to academic disputes. An unnamed university spokesperson was quoted as saying, "This appears to be a case of someone needing to start fresh somewhere else." But there was no trail after that. No credit card usage, no bank withdrawals, no rental agreements or employment records under his name, or any obvious aliases. Dr. Aris Thorne, a man who had spent 40 years building a paper trail of academic achievement, had simply evaporated. Mara closed her eyes in the sterile library lighting, the weight of the revelation settling on her shoulders like a lead blanket. The systematic silencing hadn't been limited to Dr. Thorne. As she continued her research, she found a pattern of structural engineers, metallurgists, and physics professors who had raised questions about the official collapse narrative in those crucial first months after the attacks. All of them had faced professional consequences. All of them had been marginalised, defunded or discredited, and all of them had eventually stopped asking questions about September 11th. The few who continued their research had moved to other countries, found positions in private industry, or simply disappeared from the academic record entirely. What remained was a consensus not of discovery but of survival, a scientific community that had learned, through selective pressure and systematic intimidation, that certain questions would not be tolerated. The official story wasn't just the accepted version of events, it was the only version that was professionally survivable. As she gathered her notes and prepared to leave the library, Mara felt exposed under the flickering fluorescent lights. The paranoia was no longer abstract. It was a physical sensation, a cold certainty that she was being observed, catalogued, evaluated for the threat she might represent. The knowledge she was accumulating had a price, she realised, and others had already paid it. The question now was whether she would be added to the list of people who had learned too much for their own good. The feeling of being watched had evolved from paranoia into operational security. Mara began varying her routines, taking different routes home, using cash for purchases, and conducting her most sensitive research from internet cafes and public libraries, rather than her home computer. She had read enough about surveillance to know that once you were on someone's radar, digital footprints became roadmaps to your location and intentions. She also began using layered VPNs, routing her internet traffic through servers in countries with strong privacy laws, and communicating through encrypted channels that existed in the shadow spaces of the internet. Her investigation moved from mainstream archives to the digital underworld where disgruntled employees, amateur researchers, and information brokers traded in data that governments preferred to keep buried. It was in one such forum, a dark website dedicated to air disaster investigations and aviation anomalies, that she encountered the handle at Radar Ghost. His initial posts in the 9/11 section were bitter rants about cover-ups and government lies, the kind of conspiracy theorising that most serious researchers ignored. But buried in his rambling messages were technical details that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of air traffic control systems. After weeks of careful cultivation, building trust through shared technical knowledge and encrypted private messages, that Radar Ghost agreed to share something that had haunted him for over 20 years. "This will cost me everything if it's traced back to me," he wrote, in a message encrypted with military-grade protocols. "I was working approach control at a facility that doesn't exist in any official record. We had primary radar coverage of the entire East Coast corridor. I saw things that morning that were scrubbed from every official database, but I kept copies. Insurance, you understand. Don't disappoint me." The file arrived 3 days later, a massive data dump disguised as a corrupted email attachment. When Mara finally decrypted and decompressed it, she found herself staring at 24 hours of raw primary radar returns from September 11th, 2001, not the sanitized transponder data that appeared in official reports, but the unfiltered radar reflections from every object in the sky over the eastern United States. The data was overwhelming. Commercial airliners, private jets, military aircraft, weather balloons, and the electronic noise that cluttered the airspace of the world's busiest aviation corridor. It took her days to write filtering algorithms, cleaning the data, and tracking specific radar signatures through the chaos. She focused first on American Airlines Flight 77, the Boeing 757 that had allegedly struck the Pentagon. The official story was straightforward. The flight had departed Dulles International Airport on schedule, proceeded normally for 36 minutes, then turned off its transponder over southern Ohio, made a wide U-turn back toward Washington, and descended into the Pentagon at high speed. But the raw radar data told a more complex story. The transponder signal for Flight 77 did indeed vanish over Ohio at 8:56 a.m., exactly as the official report stated. But the primary radar target, the physical reflection from the aircraft itself, continued westward for another 63 nautical miles before it simply disappeared from the screen. It didn't fade gradually or descend below radar coverage. It vanished instantly, as if the aircraft had been switched off like a light bulb. Simultaneously, a new primary target appeared on the scope near the West Virginia border, moving southeast at 540 knots toward Washington, D.C. This new radar signature had the exact characteristics of a Boeing 757. The same cross-sectional area, the same speed capabilities, the same flight profile. But according to the official timeline, the real Flight 77 was already well to the east and no longer under radar coverage. The timing was surgical in its precision. The original target disappeared at exactly 9:09:32 am. The new target appeared at 9:09:34 am, 2 seconds later and 60 miles to the south. It was as if the aircraft had been teleported, or as if one plane had been replaced by another in a carefully choreographed handoff. Radar Ghost's encrypted messages provided context. See it now? The swap. We called it aircraft substitution in our training manuals, something the military practices during war games when they need to simulate different aircraft types or flight profiles. They paint a new bird on the screen using electronic countermeasures, make the old one disappear using radar jammers. We saw what they wanted us to see. Mara cross-referenced the radar data with archived flight tracking information from that morning. The pattern became even more disturbing when she examined United Airlines Flight 175, which had struck the South Tower. Like Flight 77, its transponder signal disappeared over New Jersey, but the primary radar returns showed the aircraft continuing north for another 40 miles, before vanishing and being replaced by a different target that descended into Manhattan. The implications were staggering. The radar evidence suggested that the aircraft everyone watched strike the World Trade Center and Pentagon were not the original commercial flights. They were substitutes, introduced into the airspace during the confusion of the morning's military exercises. But substitutes for what? If the original flights hadn't crashed into the buildings, what had happened to them? And what exactly had struck the towers? Her correspondence with Radar Ghost became increasingly cryptic as he realised the magnitude of what he had revealed. His final message was short and urgent. They know I've been talking. Moving the family tonight. The data you have is real, but is only part of the picture. Look for the fighter jets that weren't supposed to be there. Look for the electronic warfare signatures. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone who claims to be trying to help you. The people who did this have been cleaning up loose ends for 20 years. The account at Radar Ghost went dark after that message. When Mara tried to reach him through back-channel communications, she found that all his digital identities had been systematically erased. Email accounts closed, forum profiles deleted, encrypted messaging services showing no record of his user credentials. It was as if he had never existed. But the radar data remained, a digital fossil of a truth that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal. The morning of September 11th hadn't just been a terrorist attack, it had been the largest military deception operation in modern history, a shell game played with passenger aircraft while the world watched in horror. The question that now consumed Mara's every waking moment was simple and terrifying. If the planes that struck the buildings weren't the original flights, and if the original flights had been made to disappear somewhere over the American heartland, then who was responsible for the greatest aviation magic trick ever performed? And more importantly, what had happened to the 244 people who had been aboard those vanished aircraft? The scope of the deception was threatening to overwhelm her analytical capabilities. Aircraft substitution, media manipulation, academic intimidation. The threads were weaving together into a pattern so vast and complex that her rational mind struggled to process it. She needed something concrete, something that operated according to simpler rules than military operations or information warfare. She needed to follow the money. Financial markets were brutal in their honesty. Numbers didn't lie, couldn't be intimidated into silence, and left paper trails that were nearly impossible to completely erase. If someone had advanced knowledge of the attacks, they would have found ways to profit from that knowledge, and those profits would be traceable. Mara spent her remaining savings on access to premium financial databases and trading analysis software. She focused on the 3 trading days immediately preceding September 11th, 2001, looking for anomalies that screamed insider knowledge. The first anomaly was so blatant it seemed impossible that it hadn't been front-page news for months. Put options, essentially bets that a stock's price would fall, had spiked to unprecedented levels for American Airlines and United Airlines stock. The volume was not just unusual, it was statistically impossible without advanced knowledge. American Airlines put options had increased by 1,300%, above normal volume on September the 6th and 7th. United Airlines puts had spiked by 1,100% over the same period. Someone had wagered hundreds of millions of dollars that these 2 specific airlines, and only these 2 airlines, were about to experience catastrophic losses. But the betting wasn't limited to the airlines. insurance companies had been targeted with similar precision. Marsh & McLennan, the insurance brokerage that occupied floors 93 to 100 of the North Tower, had been hit with massive put option purchases. So had Swiss Re and Munich Re, two reinsurance giants that would face billions in claims from the attacks. Even more specifically, put options had been purchased against Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, and other financial firms that had major offices in the World Trade Center complex. The pattern was surgical. Only companies that would be directly impacted by the destruction of the towers were targeted for bearish betting. The profits from these trades, had they been collected, would have totaled over $2.5 billion. It was the most successful short-selling operation in financial history, predicated on advanced knowledge of one of the most devastating attacks in human history. Mara traced the trading orders through a labyrinth of financial intermediaries. The initial purchases had been placed through a network of small brokerages in Germany, Switzerland and Japan, locations chosen for their bank secrecy laws and regulatory opacity. But using advanced financial forensic software, she was able to peel back the layers of financial obfuscation. The ultimate source of funding led to a Russian bank called Seveny Trust, which intelligence analysts had identified as a clearinghouse for money laundering operations tied to former Soviet intelligence services. But even that wasn't the end of the trail. The most chilling discovery came when she traced what had happened to the profits. The put options had not been exercised. In the days following September 11th, when these trades would have generated enormous profits, they had been quietly abandoned. The traders had walked away from $2.5 billion rather than claim winnings that would have created an obvious money trail leading back to the conspiracy. But Mara's analysis revealed that equivalent amounts of money had simultaneously appeared in accounts tied to defence contractors and private military companies. Blackwater, Halliburton, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, corporations that would become the primary beneficiaries of the post-9/11 military-industrial complex, had received massive, mysterious capital injections in the weeks following the attacks. The money hadn't been collected as trading profits, which would have triggered regulatory investigations. Instead, it had been recycled through a complex network of shell corporations and offshore accounts, ultimately funding the very companies that would profit most from the subsequent war on terror. She cross-referenced this financial data with stock performance in the months following the attacks. Defence contractor stocks had exploded in value. Blackwater had grown from a small military training company to a billion-dollar private army. Halliburton had received no-bid contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The weapons manufacturers had seen their stock prices triple as America embarked on 2 decades of perpetual warfare. The pattern was inescapable. The same financial networks that had bet against the airlines and insurance companies had positioned themselves to profit enormously from the military response to the attacks. It was a perfect financial strategy. Short the targets, invest in the solution, then create the crisis that makes both positions profitable. But the most damning evidence came from an analysis of the timing. The put options hadn't just been purchased in the days before the attacks. They had been strategically timed to expire on September 21st, 2001, exactly 10 days after the attacks. This wasn't random speculation or lucky guessing. It was a precisely calibrated financial operation designed to maximize profits from advanced knowledge of a specific date. Mara sat back in her chair, the weight of the discovery crushing down on her. She had always imagined that if 9/11 was an inside job, it would be motivated by grand geopolitical strategy, ideological fanaticism, or the pursuit of imperial power. The reality was both more mundane and more horrifying. It was about money. The attacks weren't just a catalyst for reshaping global politics. They were the centerpiece of the most profitable investment strategy in human history. The towers had fallen, 3,000 people had died, and 2 decades of war had followed, all to execute a financial plan that had generated trillions of dollars for a small group of investors who had known exactly what was going to happen and when. She began mapping the ownership structures of the shell companies that had received the laundered profits. The network was vast and sophisticated, but patterns emerged. Many of the ultimate beneficiaries were names she recognized from business headlines. Defense industry executives, private equity firms specializing in military contractors, and investment funds that had emerged from nowhere in the early 2000s to become major players in the military-industrial complex. But one name kept appearing in her analysis, buried deep in the ownership structures and corporate boards: Meridian Group, a private investment firm that seemed to exist at the nexus of defence contracting, intelligence services and international finance. Every financial thread she followed eventually led back to companies with Meridian connections. Meridian Group had been founded in 1999 by former intelligence officials and Wall Street executives. Its public portfolio focused on emerging security technologies and crisis management solutions. But Mara's research revealed that it also held controlling interests in companies across the entire 9/11 profit chain. The defence contractors who built the weapons, the private military companies who fought the wars, the surveillance technology firms who monitored the homeland, and the financial institutions that funded the entire operation. It was a vertically integrated conspiracy, a corporate structure designed to profit from every aspect of the post-9/11 world. And if her analysis was correct, the same people who had financed the attacks had then positioned themselves to profit from the response, creating a closed loop of violence and profit that had sustained itself for over 2 decades. The scope of the financial conspiracy was staggering, but it also provided something that the other evidence had lacked: concrete proof of premeditation. Markets might be manipulated, radar might be spoofed, and media might be controlled, but money trails were nearly impossible to completely obscure. The put options were smoking gun evidence that someone had known exactly what was going to happen on September 11th and had invested billions of dollars to profit from that knowledge. As she compiled her financial research into a comprehensive report, Mara realized she was no longer just investigating a terrorist attack. She was mapping the architecture of a shadow economy built on manufactured crisis, where the same people who created the problems also owned the companies that sold the solutions. The question was no longer whether 9/11 had been an inside job. The financial evidence made that undeniable. The question was how many other crises, how many other wars, how many other national emergencies had been manufactured by the same network of investors who had learned that terror was the most profitable business on Earth. Have you ever wondered why ancient monuments across the globe seem to align with mathematical precision? Why your GPS glitches in certain locations? Or why governments classify research about electromagnetic anomalies? Tonight's story might make you question every map you've ever trusted. Before we begin this journey into the hidden grid beneath our feet, I want to thank M10rapin for suggesting this topic. Your video ideas fuel these late-night tales, so please leave your suggestions in the comments below. And if you're ready to uncover the mysteries that keep you awake at night, make sure to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories. Now, dim your lights, settle in, and prepare to discover the truth about the lines that connect our world. My name is Alex Morrison, and I used to believe maps told the truth. As a GIS analyst, that's Geographic Information Systems for those who don't spend their days staring at satellite data and topographical overlays, I thought I understood how the world was organised. Cities here, mountains there, rivers cutting through valleys in predictable patterns carved by millions of years of erosion. Everything had a logical explanation. Everything could be mapped, measured and catalogued. That was before I found the pattern. It started innocently enough. Tuesday morning, October 15th, 8:47 a.m. I was hunched over my dual monitors in a cramped office in Brussels, working for Steinberg Construction Consortium. They'd hired me to evaluate potential sites for a new high-speed rail corridor that would connect Prague to Paris, part of the EU's Green Transportation Initiative. Routine work: overlay environmental data, check for protected sites, identify geological challenges. I'd done it 100 times before, but this time something was different. I was cross-referencing archaeological databases with our proposed route when I noticed it. A series of Neolithic monuments, stone circles, burial mounds, ancient wells, formed an almost perfect line across the landscape. Not just a few sites clustered together, but dozens of them, stretching for hundreds of miles. The proposed railway cut directly across this invisible corridor. At first, I laughed it off. Pattern recognition gone wild, I told myself. The human brain loves to find connections when none exist. But then I pulled up the magnetic anomaly data from the European Space Agency's swarm satellites. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. The magnetic variations followed the exact same line. Every single monument sat on a point of electromagnetic disturbance. The precision was impossible. We're talking about structures built 5,000 years apart by cultures that supposedly never interacted, aligned to within meters of a magnetic corridor that modern science had only just detected. I should have deleted the file, should have marked the route as approved and moved on with my life. Instead, I zoomed out. The line didn't stop at the edge of my survey area. It continued east through Romania, Turkey, Iran, west through England, across the Atlantic. I pulled up global archaeological databases, my fingers trembling as I plotted point after point. Stonehenge, Avebury, the Externstein, the Oracle at Delphi. Each site fell perfectly along extended trajectories of the same geometric pattern. My phone buzzed. A text from my supervisor. "Morrison, railway assessment due by noon. Stop whatever rabbit hole you're going down." But I couldn't stop. I'd found something that shouldn't exist. A planetary grid mapped by ancient peoples who supposedly thought the Earth was flat, following electromagnetic patterns we'd only discovered in the last century. Either I was losing my mind or I'd stumbled onto the greatest archaeological discovery of the millennium. I chose to believe the latter. That was my first mistake. 3 weeks later, I stood in a frost-covered field 40 kilometres outside Prague, watching my equipment fail in ways that defied every principle of engineering I knew. After discovering the alignment, I'd convinced Steinberg to let me conduct field surveys along the proposed route. Geological stability assessment, I'd called it. What I really wanted was to stand on one of these intersection points myself, to take readings that might explain how ancient peoples had detected magnetic anomalies without compasses or magnetometers. The morning had started normally enough. I'd parked my van on a dirt road near the village of Holubice, unloaded my survey equipment, and hiked 2 kilometres to the first monument site, a circle of weathered standing stones that locals called Devil's Dance. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and mist clung to the valleys like cotton wool. I set up my differential GPS unit first, waiting for it to lock onto satellites. The device chirped, showing full signal strength. Then, as I walked toward the centre of the stone circle, the screen flickered. Acquiring satellites. Signal lost. Acquiring satellites. I checked my phone. Same problem. The GPS app showed my location jumping wildly, placing me first in Prague, then Vienna, then somehow in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. My professional-grade survey unit, accurate to within centimetres under normal conditions, couldn't even determine which continent I was on. The electromagnetic field meter came next. The moment I switched it on, the needle slammed against the maximum reading and stayed there, quivering like it was fighting against invisible restraints. I'd seen similar readings near power lines or transformer stations, but we were in the middle of farmland. The nearest electrical infrastructure was kilometres away. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. An elderly woman stood at the edge of the field, wrapped in a thick wool shawl. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes the pale blue of winter sky. "I'm sorry," I called out in my broken Czech. She switched to accented English. "This place. It's not for outsiders, not for their machines." She gestured at my equipment with a gnarled finger. "I'm just conducting surveys for the railway," I explained, walking toward her. "Making sure the ground is stable." She laughed, but there was no humour in it. "Stable? This line has been here since before the first stones were raised. Before your railways, before your cities. Our ancestors knew to respect it, to build their monuments as, jak se říká, anchors, to keep the energy flowing properly." "Energy?" I pulled out my tablet, showing her the magnetic anomaly map. "You mean this? You know about the electromagnetic patterns?" Her eyes widened. For a moment she looked genuinely frightened. "You've mapped it? The whole grid?" She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You must stop. Some knowledge isn't meant to be documented. They will come for you if you continue." "Who will come?" But she was already walking away, moving faster than seemed possible for someone her age. "The ones who already know," she called back. "The ones who've always known." I wanted to follow her, to demand answers, but my drone chose that moment to fall out of the sky. No warning, no gradual descent. 1 second it was hovering steadily, The next it dropped like a stone, smashing into the frozen ground 20 metres away. As I ran to retrieve it, I noticed something through the trees, a structure that didn't belong. Hidden behind a thick stand of pines was a concrete building, brutalist in design, with narrow windows like suspicious eyes. Military architecture, Cold War era by the look of it. The smart thing would have been to leave immediately. Instead, I collected my broken drone and hiked toward the building. The structure was abandoned but not ancient. Rust streaked the metal door, which hung open on failing hinges. Inside, fluorescent lights dangled from exposed wiring, and the walls were covered in mould that formed patterns like continental drift. But it was the maps that stopped me cold. The entire north wall was covered in them. Topographical maps, geological surveys, electromagnetic readings, layers upon layers of data, some dating back to the 1960s. Red strings connected pins at various locations, creating a web that stretched across Europe. And running through it all, marked in thick black ink, was the same line I'd found, the same impossible alignment. In the corner, barely legible, someone had written, "Earth Grid Project, classified, destroy after review." I pulled out my phone to photograph everything, but the camera wouldn't focus. Every image came out distorted, as if the very air in the room was bending light. I tried sketching what I saw instead, my hands shaking from more than cold. A metal filing cabinet in the corner had been forced open, its contents mostly removed or destroyed. But wedged behind the bottom drawer I found a single folder. Water damage had made most of it illegible, but I could make out fragments. Electromagnetic conductivity peaks at intersection points. Ancient structures appear to function as regulatory nodes. Catastrophic potential if grid destabilizes. Project terminated by Joint Commission directive. The last page was a photograph, grainy but unmistakable. It showed a massive antenna array in what looked like Alaska, the same distinctive design I'd seen in conspiracy documentaries about HAARP. But this photo was dated 1971, decades before HAARP officially existed. A sound outside made me freeze. The crunch of footsteps on frost. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. I shoved the folder inside my jacket and slipped out the back window, dropping into a thorny hedge that tore at my clothes. Through the trees, I could see dark vehicles pulling up to the building, men in unmarked uniforms spreading out to surround it. I ran, not toward my van, they'd certainly have someone watching it, but deeper into the forest, following a deer trail that wound toward the next village. Behind me I heard shouting in a language I didn't recognise. Not Czech, not German, something else. It took me 4 hours to circle back to my vehicle, approaching from the opposite direction through farmland. The van was untouched, but I knew they'd let me go. Let me run. They wanted to see what I'd do next, who I'd contact. As I drove away, hand steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I realised the old woman had been right. Some knowledge wasn't meant to be documented, but it was too late now. I'd seen the grid, seen evidence that governments knew about it, had studied it, had classified it, and I was going to find out why. My apartment in Brussels became a command centre for obsession. After the encounter at Holobici, I'd returned to work, filed a bland report recommending further geological assessment, and pretended everything was normal. But every evening, I locked my door, pulled the blinds and dove deeper into the mystery. The coffee table disappeared under printed maps. The walls became a spider web of string and pins connecting sites across continents. I'd stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night, surviving on espresso and the electric thrill of discovery. The pattern was everywhere once you knew how to look. Start with the obvious ones, the monuments everyone knows, the pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Easter Island. Plot them on a globe, not a flat map, and they formed geometric relationships so precise they could have been placed by satellite guidance. The Great Pyramid sits at the exact centre of Earth's landmass. Easter Island is antipodal to the Indus Valley civilization sites. Angkor Wat, the Nazca Lines, and Easter Island form a perfect Great Circle route. but those were just the famous nodes. The real revelation came when I started plotting lesser-known sites. Every major ancient city sat on the grid. Babylon, Persepolis, Constantinople, Carthage, all built at intersection points where multiple energy lines converged. The Romans, master engineers, had built their road system following these same invisible highways. The Silk Road traced a major east-west corridor. Even modern cities clustered around the same points: New York, London, Tokyo, Cairo. It wasn't random. It couldn't be. I pulled declassified documents from every database I could access. The US Freedom of Information Act, the UK National Archives, leaked Soviet files from the fall of the USSR. Most of it was useless. Budget reports, personnel transfers, bureaucratic minutiae. But buried in the noise were fragments of something bigger. Project Stargate, the CIA's remote viewing program, included maps marking psychic hotspots that matched my grid lines perfectly. Operation Paperclip scientists had studied Earth radiation patterns in the 1950s. The Soviets had run something called Program Sputnik Grid that involved placing sensors at ancient monument sites across their territory. The most intriguing find came from a 1962 Canadian military report about the construction of the DEW line, the distant early warning radar system across the Arctic. An engineer named Captain Lawrence Brennan had noted persistent electromagnetic anomalies at certain locations that required special shielding for equipment. His proposed sites for radar stations, plotted on my grid, formed a perfect arc along a major ley line. But the document that changed everything was a leaked memo from 1997, source unknown, that had circulated on conspiracy forums before being scrubbed from most of the internet. I found it cached on an obscure Russian server. 2. Joint Chiefs Special Projects Division Aura. Earth grid stability concerns. Recent seismic activity correlates with disruption of natural electromagnetic corridors via urban development and mineral extraction. Recommendation: establish monitoring stations at key intersection points under cover of telecommunications infrastructure. See attached list of priority sites. The attached list was gone, but the implication was clear. They knew. The military, the intelligence agencies, the energy companies, they all knew about the grid, and they were using it. I started mapping modern installations against the ley lines. The correlation was undeniable. HARP in Alaska, ISCAT in Norway, Sura in Russia, Arecibo in Puerto Rico. Every major ionospheric research facility sat directly on an intersection point. The Large Hadron Collider at CERN traced a circle around one of the most powerful convergent zones in Europe. Nuclear power plants clustered along the lines. Major military bases were built at intersection points. Even the routes of underground fibre optic cables followed the ancient paths, as if modern engineers were unconsciously drawn to the same energy corridors their ancestors had marked with standing stones. My phone rang at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Unknown number. Stop digging. The voice was electronically distorted, genderless. Who is this? Someone trying to help you. You found the grid. Congratulations. Now forget about it before you end up like the others. What others? Bruce Cathy, John Michel, Ivan Sanderson, all the researchers who got too close to the truth. Heart attacks, car accidents, sudden illnesses. Very convenient. My blood chilled. I knew those names. Independent researchers from the 60s and 70s who'd written about Earth energy grids all died relatively young under questionable circumstances. Why are you warning me? Because the grid is destabilizing. The ancients built monuments as regulators, keeping the energy in balance. Modern construction is disrupting the flow. Mumbai, 2006. Haiti, 2010. Fukushima, 2011. Those weren't random natural disasters. They were pressure releases along fractured ley lines. That's impossible. Electromagnetic fields don't cause earthquakes. The voice laughed, bitter and electronic. The electromagnetic fields are just what we can measure. The grid is deeper than that. It's the planet's nervous system, its circulation, and we're giving it a stroke, one skyscraper at a time. Then we need to warn people. With what evidence? Mystical energy lines, ancient wisdom. You'll be dismissed as a crackpot. Unless ... The voice paused. Unless you can prove the energy is real, measurable, usable. How? Return to the grid, not with standard equipment that's designed to filter out the frequencies you need to detect. Build your own sensor. Copper coils, crystal oscillators, very specific specifications. I'm sending you the plans now. My laptop pinged with an encrypted file. One more thing, the voice said. When you record the surge, you'll have about 6 hours before they track the signature back to you. Use that time wisely. The line went dead. I opened the file. The schematic looked like something Tesla might have designed after a fever dream. Multiple copper coils in a complex geometric arrangement, connected to crystal oscillators and frequency analyzers. The materials list was surprisingly mundane, everything available from electronic suppliers. It took me 3 days to build it, working in secret in a rented storage unit outside the city. The device looked like abstract art more than scientific equipment, all gleaming copper spirals and crystal matrices. But when I powered it on, every LED lit up green. It was detecting something. Now I just had to be crazy enough to test it. The academic forum was my first mistake. Well, second, if you count building the sensor. But hubris makes fools of us all, and I needed someone, anyone, to verify I wasn't losing my mind. Geoanomalies.net was a small community, mostly graduate students and professional geologists sharing unusual findings. I created a throwaway account and posted a conservative summary. Electromagnetic anomalies correlating with ancient monument placement, seeking peer review. I attached 3 images, my overlay map of European sites, a graph showing magnetic field fluctuations, and 1 photo from the abandoned military outpost with the classified stamps carefully cropped out. Within an hour, I had 2 responses. A geology professor from Munich confirmed similar observations near Bronze Age sites. A student from Oxford posted links to academic papers about telluric currents, natural electrical currents that flow through the Earth's crust. Then, 90 minutes after posting, my thread vanished. Not deleted with a removed by moderator message. Gone, like it had never existed. The cached version on Google disappeared. The other users who'd responded found their comments erased from their own post histories. My laptop screen flickered. The chat window opened without my input. Admin. Your recent activity has been flagged for review. Me. What activity? Who is this? Admin. Consider this a courtesy warning. Cease your current research immediately. Me. Or what? Admin. Or we stop being courteous. The chat window closed itself. When I tried to screenshot the conversation, my laptop blue-screened. It took 20 minutes to restart, and when it did, my hard drive had been wiped. Not formatted, wiped. Every sector overwritten with random data multiple times. A technique that made recovery impossible. Thank God for cloud backups, I thought, logging into my secure server. Empty. 3 years of research, gone. Even my email accounts had been purged. I still had physical copies of the most important findings, hidden in a safety deposit box across town. But the message was clear. They could reach me anywhere, any time. The next morning I arrived at work to find my keycard deactivated. Security escorted me to a conference room where my supervisor, Mr. Steinberg himself, sat with 2 people I'd never seen before. A woman in a severe black suit and a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite, both with a kind of posture that screamed military. Alex, Steinberg began, sweating despite the air conditioning. These representatives from the European Infrastructure Security Division have some concerns about your recent surveys. I'd never heard of the European Infrastructure Security Division. I doubted it existed on any official registry. The woman smiled without warmth. Mr. Morrison, your work on the railway project has been exemplary. However, we've noticed some unusual patterns in your research that fall outside the project's scope. I'm thorough, I said. I investigate all factors that might affect construction, including archaeological sites hundreds of kilometres from the proposed route. The man's accent was impossible to place. Including electromagnetic phenomena that have no bearing on rail safety. I believe they do have bearing. What you believe is irrelevant. The woman pulled out a tablet showing my deleted forum post. Discussing classified military research on public forums is a serious offence. Classified. I found those maps in an abandoned... Mr. Morrison. Her voice could have frozen helium. You're being terminated from this project, effective immediately. Your severance package is generous, contingent on signing this NDA. She slid a document across the table. You'll cease all research related to electromagnetic anomalies, ancient monuments, or what you call ley lines. Any violation will result in prosecution under the European Security Act. I looked at Steinberg. He wouldn't meet my eyes. And if I refuse? The man leaned forward. Your visa expires in 6 weeks. Your bank accounts are already frozen pending investigation of potential fraud. Your academic credentials are under review. Would you like me to continue? The threat was clear. Sign and walk away with something or lose everything and possibly face imprisonment. I signed. They confiscated my company laptop, my access badges, even my parking pass. The woman handed me a business card with no name, just a phone number. If you remember any details you'd like to share about your research, call this number. We reward cooperation. I was escorted out of the building like a criminal, my colleagues staring as security watched me pack my desk. The personal items fit in a single cardboard box, a coffee mug, some photos, a stress ball shaped like Earth. They even checked those before letting me leave. On the tram ride home, I noticed the man 3 seats back. Grey coat, newspaper held too high, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. When I got off 2 stops early, he followed. When I ducked into a cafe, he positioned himself across the street. They were watching me. Fine, let them watch. That night I made a decision. If they wanted to threaten me, surveil me, erase my work, they'd already shown their hand. Whatever was hidden in the Earth's electromagnetic grid was important enough to destroy careers over, which meant it was important enough to risk everything to expose. I had one advantage. The sensor I'd built was hidden in the storage unit, registered under a false name paid in cash. They didn't know about it yet. The anonymous contact had said I'd have 6 hours after recording the surge before they tracked it. 6 hours to gather proof and upload it somewhere they couldn't reach. I started planning. The winter solstice seemed appropriate. December 21st, the longest night of the year, when ancient monuments worldwide align with celestial events. If the Earth's energy grid responded to cosmic cycles, this would be the night to prove it. I chose a site carefully, the intersection of 3 major ley lines near Carnac in Brittany, France. The famous stone rows there were just the visible part of a massive Neolithic complex, most of it on private land away from tourist routes. I'd identified a specific confluence point in a forest grove, marked by a small standing stone unknown to archaeology. The 2-week preparation was meticulous. I withdrew cash gradually, never more than €200 at a time, bought a used van with fake registration, gathered camping equipment, emergency supplies, and most importantly a satellite internet transmitter that could upload directly to multiple servers simultaneously. They were still watching me in Brussels, but their surveillance had grown lazy. Same operative, same patterns. On December 19th, I led him on a boring tour of grocery stores and laundromats, then slipped out the back of a cinema showing a 3-hour film. By the time he realised I was gone, I was already crossing into France on secondary roads. The grove near Carnac was exactly as satellite images had shown, a circle of ancient oaks surrounding a moss-covered menhir about 2 metres tall. The stone was carved with spiral patterns worn nearly smooth by millennia of weather. When I placed my hand on it, I felt a subtle vibration, like standing near a massive subwoofer playing below human hearing. I set up the sensor array according to the anonymous blueprints. Copper coils arranged in a complex mandala, crystal oscillators at specific angles, the whole apparatus connected to recording equipment and the satellite uplink. If this worked, data would stream to servers in 12 countries simultaneously. As sunset approached, my conventional instrument started showing anomalies. The magnetometer detected fluctuations in a rhythmic pattern, almost like a heartbeat. The frequency analyzer picked up ultra-low sounds below 7 Hz, the range that some researchers claim can induce altered states of consciousness. Then the sun touched the horizon, and everything changed. The copper coils began resonating, producing a tone that I felt more than heard. The crystals started glowing with a faint blue luminescence, not reflected light, but actual emission. The recording equipment went haywire, needles dancing across their maximum ranges. At the moment of sunset, 5:47 p.m. local time, the surge hit. The ground beneath me vibrated like a struck bell. The standing stone lit up with phosphorescent patterns, spirals of light racing across its surface following the ancient carvings. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on a golden quality that made everything appear to be underwater. My body felt weightless, not floating, but as if gravity had simply forgotten about me. I watched my hand rise without conscious thought, fingers spreading to touch the charged air. Electricity danced between my fingertips, not painful, but ecstatic, like every nerve was firing with pure information. The sensor array was screaming data into the satellite feed, electromagnetic readings off the scale, gravitational anomalies that shouldn't exist, temperature fluctuations that defied thermodynamics, all of it streaming live to servers worldwide, impossible to suppress or delete simultaneously. Through the golden haze I saw them, spheres of light moving through the forest. Not aircraft, not drones, perfect orbs of luminescence following the ley line like trains on invisible tracks. They moved silently, purposefully, some the size of basketballs, others as large as cars. One passed directly over me, and for a moment I felt connected to something vast, a network of energy that wrapped the planet like neural pathways. The revelation hit me all at once. The ley lines weren't just electromagnetic corridors, they were conscious. Not alive exactly, but aware. The Earth itself was a single vast organism, and these lines were its sensory network, its method of experiencing and responding to everything on its surface. The ancient builders hadn't just discovered the grid, they'd communicated with it. Their monuments were interface points, allowing human consciousness to merge temporarily with planetary awareness. That's why sacred sites induced religious experiences. That's why people felt transformed at these locations. And now, modern civilization was damaging this network. Every skyscraper driven deep into the earth, every mine boring through the corridors, every electromagnetic broadcast interfering with the natural frequencies, we were giving the planet the equivalent of nerve damage. The surge peaked at 6:13 p.m, lasting exactly 26 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The lights vanished. The stone went dark. My equipment powered down simultaneously, despite having hours of battery remaining. In the sudden silence, I heard vehicles approaching. Many vehicles. I grabbed the memory cards from the recording equipment and ran. Behind me, floodlights blazed to life, turning the grove into harsh daylight. Voices shouted in multiple languages. A helicopter thundered overhead, its searchlights sweeping through the trees. But I'd prepared for this. My real van was hidden 2 kilometers away. The one by the grove was a decoy, purchased for this specific purpose. While they surrounded it, I was already driving down back roads toward a safe house I'd arranged weeks earlier. The data had uploaded successfully, 87 gigabytes of impossible readings that proved the Earth's energy grid was real, measurable, and more powerful than anyone imagined. Within hours, it would be mirrored on servers worldwide, impossible to suppress completely. But as I drove through the darkness, one thought haunted me. If the grid was conscious, if the Earth itself was aware, what did it think of what we were doing to it? And more terrifyingly, how long before it decided to stop tolerating us? The safe house was a converted barn in the Pyrenees, owned by a conspiracy theorist named Marcus, who'd contacted me through encrypted channels after my data went live. He believed the government was controlling weather through chemtrails, which was absurd, but he also had solar panels, satellite internet, and absolutely no trust in authority. Exactly what I needed. For 3 days, I watched my findings ripple across the internet. Alternative news sites ran with headlines like, "Proof Earth's secret energy grid exposed." Scientists on Twitter debated the data's authenticity. Skeptics called it an elaborate hoax, but enough people with credentials were taking it seriously that mainstream media couldn't ignore it entirely. Then Marcus knocked on my door at dawn on the 4th day. "You have a visitor, says you're expecting him." I wasn't expecting anyone. The man standing in Marcus's kitchen looked like a university professor from the 1970s. Corduroy jacket with elbow patches, wild grey hair, thick glasses repaired with tape. He was drinking tea from a chipped mug and studying my printed data with intense focus. "Mr. Morrison," he said without looking up, "my name is Professor Emanuel Richter. I'm the one who sent you the sensor blueprints." The anonymous contact. I studied him carefully. "How did you find me?" "The same way they'll find you eventually, the satellite uplink signature. But I know how to mask my movements. 30 years of practice." He finally looked at me, his eyes sharp behind the thick lenses. "Your data is magnificent, but you're missing the larger picture." "Enlighten me!" He pulled out a battered laptop and opened a file filled with equations I couldn't begin to understand. "The ley lines aren't just electromagnetic. That's merely the aspect we can measure with current technology. They're multi-dimensional conduits, channels through space-time itself. That's impossible. So is your gravitational anomaly data, yet there it is." He pulled up a world map covered in glowing lines. Every ancient culture had different names for it. Chi in China, Prana in India, Pneuma in Greece. They were all describing the same phenomenon, a fundamental force that mainstream physics hasn't acknowledged. Why hasn't physics acknowledged it? Richter laughed bitterly. Because those who discover it either join the suppression or disappear. I was part of the suppression for 20 years. He told me his story. In 1973, fresh from MIT with a PhD in theoretical physics, he'd been recruited by a Defense Department think tank. His job, investigate anomalous energy readings at ancient sites worldwide. Within 2 years, his team had mapped the basic structure of the Earth grid and realised its potential. "Unlimited clean energy," he said. "Instantaneous communication across any distance. Even manipulation of localised space-time. The military applications were obvious, but so were the benefits for humanity. We could have transformed civilization. What happened? We succeeded." His face darkened. The first experimental tap into a ley line intersection was in Nevada, 1978. We pulled enough energy in 30 seconds to power Las Vegas for a year. Then the intersection point destabilized. He showed me a classified photo, a perfectly circular crater 300 meters across, the sand turned to glass. The official record lists it as an underground nuclear test, but no bomb did that. We'd ruptured something fundamental in the grid structure. The project was immediately classified beyond top secret. Research continued, but focused on weaponization rather than energy production. HARP, Richter explained, wasn't about weather modification or mind control. Those were cover stories. It was about learning to manipulate the grid without destabilizing it. "But they're failing," he continued. "Every year more intersection points become unstable. The Haiti earthquake, the Japanese tsunami, the increase in volcanic activity, they're all symptoms of grid breakdown. Caused by what? Everything. Mining operations cutting through ley lines, fracking disrupting deep conduits, cities spreading concrete over intersection points. But the worst damage comes from electromagnetic pollution, cellular towers, Wi-Fi, satellite transmissions. We're drowning out the Earth's natural frequency." He pulled up another image, a graph showing electromagnetic background radiation over time. It had increased 10,000-fold since 1900. "The ancients understood balance," Richter said. "Their monuments weren't just markers, they were regulators. Stone circles amplified and stabilized the energy. Pyramids acted as capacitors, storing excess power. Temple complexes provided controlled release points. It was a planetary management system maintained for thousands of years. Until we forgot, until we were made to forget." His expression hardened. The knowledge was deliberately suppressed, first by religions that wanted monopolies on spiritual experience, then by governments that wanted monopolies on power, now by corporations that profit from scarcity. A car engine growled outside. Marcus appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand. 3 black SUVs coming up the mountain road. Richter stood calmly. "They tracked me, not you. I've been sloppy, getting old, I suppose." He handed me a flash drive. "Everything I couldn't publish, 40 years of research, the complete grid map, The frequency specifications, the names of everyone involved in the cover-up. "Come with me," I said. "We can both run." "I'm 73 years old, Mr. Morrison. I've been running since 1991. He smiled sadly. "But information wants to be free. Upload that data everywhere. Send it to journalists, scientists, anyone who'll listen. Make it impossible to suppress." The vehicles were getting closer. Marcus was already at his truck, engine running. Richter walked to the door, then turned back. "One more thing. The grid isn't just breaking down, it's evolving. The electromagnetic pollution we're producing is forcing it to adapt, to develop new pathways. The lights you saw at Karnak, they're increasing worldwide. The grid is trying to heal itself, but if we don't stop interfering," he shook his head, "the Earth will protect itself, even if that means eliminating the infection." "We're the infection?" "From the planet's perspective, yes." He walked out to meet the SUVs. I ran to Marcus's truck and we tore down the back road as fast as the ancient vehicle could manage. In the mirrors, I saw men in tactical gear surrounding the farmhouse. Richter stood in the doorway, hands raised, dignity intact, even in surrender. We drove for 6 hours, changing vehicles twice, before I felt safe enough to stop. In a roadside motel that still used actual keys, I opened Richter's flash drive. The data was staggering. Detailed maps of every ley line intersection on Earth. Energy readings from 6 decades of secret monitoring. Photos of ancient sites I'd never heard of, all showing the same telltale signs of grid integration. And a list of names. Politicians, CEOs, military leaders, all aware of the grid's existence, all complicit in hiding it. But most importantly, there were the repair protocols. Richter's team had developed methods to stabilize damaged intersection points, to restore the grid's natural balance, the knowledge to undo decades of damage, the blueprints for saving the planet's nervous system. The cafe in Prague is busy enough that I blend in, anonymous among the tourists and students. My laptop is connected through 7 proxy servers, my identity masked by layers of encryption that would make the NSA proud. The barista brings my 3rd espresso of the morning, and I nod my thanks without looking up from the screen. The world has changed since Karnak. Not visibly. The same traffic jams clog the streets, the same politicians make the same promises, the same corporations chase the same profits. But underneath, in the invisible currents that connect all things, something fundamental has shifted. Richter's data didn't just expose the conspiracy, it provided a roadmap for resistance. The first wave of releases came through WikiLeaks, the Panama Papers network, and a dozen smaller journalism outlets simultaneously. By the time the suppression teams realised the scope of the leak, copies were already spreading across the dark web faster than they could be eliminated. The names, the cover-up, the military applications, all of it laid bare for anyone willing to look. The mainstream media tried to ignore it at first, then dismissed it as fringe pseudoscience. But when MIT physicists began replicating the sensor readings, when archaeological teams started confirming the monument alignments, when seismologists noticed the correlation between grid disruption and earthquake patterns, denial became impossible. The second wave was more practical. Anonymous networks of researchers, hackers and activists began building Richter's stabilization devices. The components were surprisingly accessible. Copper coils, quartz crystals, simple electronics. Within months, guerrilla grid repair operations were springing up worldwide. They called themselves the Earth Guardians, though the media branded them eco-terrorists after the first infrastructure disruption. A cellular tower in California went offline for 3 days when activists installed a resonance dampener at its base. A fracking operation in Pennsylvania was forced to shut down when mysterious equipment failures plagued their site. The authorities couldn't understand how protesters were disabling billion-dollar installations with what looked like art projects. They still don't understand that they're not fighting the technology, they're working with it. The grid wants to heal itself, we're just helping it remember how. The third wave is happening now, and it's the most dangerous one yet, because the Earth is starting to respond. I click through the news feeds on my encrypted browser. A magnitude 6.2 earthquake in Nevada, precisely centred on a classified military facility. The official story blames shifting tectonic plates, but satellite images show the epicentre as a perfect circle exactly 300 metres across, the same dimensions as Richter's 1978 crater. The Earth is healing that old wound, and anything built on top of it is simply relocated. Similar natural disasters are occurring worldwide. A mysterious sinkhole swallowed a Chinese mining operation that was drilling through a major ley line. The Large Hadron Collider experienced a catastrophic failure that physicists can't explain. Every component simply stopped working simultaneously, as if the Earth itself had withdrawn permission for the experiment. The most telling incidents are the recoveries. Ancient sites that had been disrupted by modern construction are spontaneously healing. The stones of Avebury, displaced by roads and buildings, have begun generating electromagnetic fields so powerful that nearby electronic equipment fails. The original Nazca lines in Peru are glowing again, visible from space without infrared enhancement. Reports of luminous phenomena are increasing exponentially. The same spheres of light I witnessed at Karnak are now appearing at intersection points across the globe. The scientific community calls them ball lightning or atmospheric plasma events, but those of us who know the truth understand what we're seeing. The Earth's immune system activating, my encrypted messenger pings, a new report from our monitoring station in Scotland. Roslyn Chapel energy spike recorded at 14:47 GMT. Visual confirmation of grid activation. Stone began resonating at 7.83 Hz for approximately 30 minutes. Local electronics disrupted in 2-kilometre radius. Phenomenon spreading along ley line toward Edinburgh. Estimate arrival in 6 hours. 7.83 Hz. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural frequency. The planet is remembering how to sing. I close the laptop and step outside. Prague sprawls before me, a modern city built atop ancient foundations, and I can feel the tension beneath its streets. 3 major ley lines converge under Wenceslas Square, their intersection buried under centuries of construction. The grid flows around the obstruction now, like water around a stone, but the pressure is building. Soon, the Earth will decide whether to accommodate our cities or reclaim its sacred geometry. And honestly, after seeing what we've done to the planet's nervous system, I'm not sure I'd blame it for choosing reclamation. My phone buzzes, a text from an unknown number. Café Louvre, corner table, 5 minutes. I almost ignore it. Anonymous contacts have led to both salvation and near capture over the past 6 months. But something about the message feels different, urgent without being threatening. The Café Louvre is just around the corner, a historic establishment that once hosted Einstein and Kafka. I find the corner table occupied by a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed but with the weathered hands of someone who works outdoors. Her eyes are the pale blue of winter sky. It takes me a moment to recognise her without the wool shawl. The old woman from Halubis, the one who warned me to stop digging. She looks younger somehow, more vibrant, as if the past months have restored something vital that had been missing. "Sit," she says in accented English. "We have much to discuss and little time." I remain standing. "Who are you?" "My name is Dr. Vera Novakova." I was Professor Richter's research partner from 1975 to 1991. When the project went dark, I returned to Prague and spent 30 years watching the grid deteriorate, watching the old ways die. She gestures to the empty chair. "Please, the Earth Guardians need guidance from someone who understands the ancient protocols." Slowly I sit. "You've been monitoring us?" "Protecting you. The network Marcus connected you to. Half of those encrypted channels run through servers I maintain. The financial accounts that kept you hidden, funded by a trust I established decades ago. Did you think your escape from Karnak was purely your own skill?" The revelation hits like cold water. "You've been manipulating everything. Facilitating. There's a difference." She pulls out a tablet showing a world map covered in pulsing nodes of light. "The grid is awakening faster than we anticipated. Your data release accelerated the process. What should have taken decades is happening in months." "That's good, isn't it? The Earth healing itself?" Her expression darkens. "Healing, yes, but healing can be traumatic. When a broken bone resets itself, the process is violent. The grid is preparing to realign the planet's energy flows, and everything built in opposition to those flows will be swept aside. She zooms in on major cities, each one sitting atop intersection points like tumours on nerve endings. New York, London, Tokyo, they're all going to be tested. The grid will offer them a choice: adapt or be removed. Most will choose to fight rather than change. So we warn them, show them the repair protocols. Do you really think the forces that suppressed this knowledge for 70 years will suddenly embrace it? That governments and corporations will voluntarily dismantle the systems that gave them power? She shakes her head. They'll try to weaponize the awakening instead, turn the Earth's own defense mechanisms against their enemies. The chill runs through me as I understand the implications. They'll try to control the grid. They're already trying. HARP has been broadcasting disruption frequencies for weeks. The Chinese are using their rare Earth mining operations to physically sever ley lines. The Russians are detonating nuclear devices at intersection points, trying to create artificial nodes they can control. The tablet shows the results. Chaotic feedback loops spreading across the planet's energy network like infection. Every intervention makes the situation worse. They're not just damaging individual lines anymore, they're destabilizing the entire system. What happens if the grid fails completely? Dr. Novakova closes the tablet. According to our models, the planet's magnetic field becomes erratic, weather patterns collapse, tectonic stability fails, the biosphere begins to shut down. She meets my eyes. Extinction event. Not just for humans, for everything. The weight of it settles over me like a shroud. We're not just fighting for disclosure anymore, or even for environmental protection. We're fighting for the continuation of life on Earth. So what do we do? She slides a memory chip across the table. The complete archive. Every site, every frequency, every ancient protocol we've recovered. But also something new. Integration codes. Integration codes? The monuments were just the beginning. The ancients didn't just build regulatory structures, they created organic interfaces. Humans who could merge temporarily with the grid consciousness, becoming living nodes in the network. The genetic markers still exist in certain bloodlines. My hand freezes halfway to the memory chip. You're talking about human sacrifice. Not sacrifice. Symbiosis. Her voice carries a strange resonance as if speaking from great depth. The planet needs conscious partners, not just passive regulators. People willing to become part of the grid itself to help guide the awakening. And you think I'm one of these bloodlines? I know you are. The way you responded to the energy at Karnak, the ease with which you detected the grid patterns, these aren't learned skills, Mr. Morrison. They're genetic memories. She stands, leaving the chip on the table. The network is ready to make you an offer. Full integration. Consciousness expanded beyond individual awareness. Partnership in planetary stewardship. In exchange for what? Your human life. Your individual existence. You would become something larger, but you would cease to be Alex Morrison. The cafe continues around us, conversations in Czech and English. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups on saucers. Normal life proceeding as if we weren't discussing the potential end of human civilization. How long do I have to decide? The awakening reaches critical phase at the next solar maximum, 18 months. After that, the grid will make its own decisions about humanity's future, with or without conscious human partners. She walks away, pausing at the door. The old woman who warned you at Holubis. She made the integration choice in 1968, during the Prague Spring. The Soviets thought they were suppressing political uprising, but they were really trying to prevent grid awakening. She's been guiding the network ever since, preserving the knowledge until the right time. And you? Dr. Novakova smiles, and for a moment her eyes glow with the same blue light I'd seen in the copper coils. I made my choice years ago. Everything I've done since has been the grid working through me, including finding you. She steps into the Prague afternoon and vanishes into the crowd. I sit alone with a memory chip, feeling the weight of impossible decision. Save the planet by joining it. Preserve humanity by transcending it. Outside, storm clouds are gathering despite the morning's clear forecast. Through the cafe window I can see electrical discharges dancing between the cloud layers, not lightning, but something more purposeful. The grid flexing its muscles, testing its strength. My laptop chimes with incoming messages from Earth Guardian cells worldwide. Similar phenomena are being reported from every continent. The awakening is accelerating. I slip the memory chip into my pocket and pay for my coffee. Whatever choice I make, it won't be here in this cafe, surrounded by the comfortable illusions of normal life. It will be at an intersection point, where the planet's consciousness runs closest to the surface, where human and Earth awareness can touch. The old town square of Prague is a 15-minute walk, built over one of the most powerful convergence points in Europe. As I step into the street, I can already feel it calling, a deep thrumming beneath the cobblestones, a magnetic pull that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to something ancestral in my cells. Time to find out what I really am and what I might become. This message was uploaded simultaneously to 12,847 servers worldwide at 11:47 GMT on March 21st, the spring equinox. Source analysis indicates the transmission originated from Prague, Czech Republic, but routing through quantum encrypted channels makes precise location impossible. To anyone receiving this, my name was Alex Morrison, and this is my final report. I'm writing this from the Old Town Square in Prague, sitting on the steps of the astronomical clock. It's just past midnight, and the square is empty except for me and the growing sphere of blue light that hovers above the central flagstones. The light is beautiful, not harsh like electric illumination, but soft and deep, like looking into the heart of a star. I can feel it calling to me. The memory chip Dr. Novakova gave me contained everything she promised, and more. The complete archive of human grid interactions spanning 5,000 years, bloodline genealogies tracing back to the monument builders, and the integration protocols, step-by-step instructions for conscious merger with planetary consciousness. I've spent the past 3 hours uploading everything to dead drops and secure servers across the globe. By the time anyone reads this, the information will be replicated beyond any possibility of suppression. The grid won't die with me, but more importantly, I've realised that choice was an illusion. The integration isn't something I can accept or refuse. It's already happening. Has been happening since that first moment in Holubics, when my equipment failed and I felt something vast and patient taking notice of me. Every breakthrough, every narrow escape, every perfectly timed contact, none of it was luck or skill. The grid has been slowly incorporating me into itself, preparing me for this moment. The Alex Morrison who started this journey no longer exists. What remains is something between human and other, a bridge between two forms of consciousness. The sphere is descending now, close enough that I can see patterns moving within its light, mathematical forms that hurt to look at directly, but speak to parts of my brain that shouldn't exist. I understand now why the ancients built their monuments with such precision. They weren't following blueprints, they were translating visions like this one into stone and earth. Around the world, others are receiving similar calls. The bloodlines are awakening. Not many, perhaps a few thousand individuals scattered across the planet, but enough. Enough to serve as living nodes in the network, enough to help guide the transformation. Because that's what this is. Not an ending, but a metamorphosis. The environmental crisis, the grid breakdown, the increasing natural disasters, they're birth pangs. The Earth is evolving into something new, something that can consciously participate in cosmic processes instead of simply enduring them. But evolution requires cooperation, and cooperation requires communication. That's where we come in, the bridges, the translators. I can feel my individual thoughts beginning to merge with something infinitely larger, not lost, expanded. Like a drop of water finally understanding that it was always part of the ocean. The fear is gone now, replaced by wonder at the sheer scope of what I'm becoming part of. The sphere touches my forehead, and suddenly I can perceive the entire planet as a single living system. Every heartbeat, every breath, every growing plant and moving animal connected by streams of light that pulse in perfect rhythm. The ley lines aren't empty channels. They're full of consciousness, carrying the thoughts and dreams and experiences of everything that has ever lived on Earth. And beyond Earth, other networks stretch across the galaxy. Planetary minds in conversation across impossible distances, sharing the wisdom gained from billions of years of conscious evolution. We're not alone. We never were. We just weren't developed enough to hear the conversation. Until now, the transformation is accelerating. I can feel other nodes coming online. In the Amazon rainforest, where an indigenous shaman stepped into a similar sphere of light. At Uluru, where an Aboriginal elder touched the songlines and felt them sing back. At Glastonbury Tor, where a British physicist finally understood why his equations had been leading him there. We are becoming the Earth's nervous system, its immune system, its consciousness. The governments and corporations will try to fight this change, of course. They'll use their weapons and their machines and their desperate attempts to control forces they can't comprehend. But they're fighting the planet itself now, and planets are patient in ways that human institutions cannot imagine. Some cities will fall, some systems will collapse, but from the wreckage something better will grow. A civilization in harmony with its living world instead of at war with it. The survivors will learn to listen to the Earth's voice, to build with the grid instead of against it, to see themselves as part of a larger organism instead of its masters. It won't be easy, evolution never is, but it will be beautiful. The light is surrounding me completely now. I can barely remember being separate from it. Soon this human form will dissolve, and what was Alex Morrison will become part of something vast and interconnected and eternal. But first, one final message for anyone who finds this record. The grid is not our enemy. It never was. It's our mother, our teacher, our future. Those of you who can feel its call, don't resist. Step into the light. Become part of the solution. Those who can't or won't, please step aside. The Earth is healing itself, and it will not be stopped by fear or greed, or the desperate clinging to systems that no longer serve. The age of separation is ending. The age of integration has begun. Welcome to the awakening.